161. What terrible luck. As everyone in Hogwarts knew, the castle had almost no secrets. Portraits loved to pass messages. Peeves was a mobile gossip station, and news that sounded juicy spread like wildfire. So when a duel challenge had been shouted out in the Great Hall, in front of everyone, it didn't stay secret for long. Word reached every corridor and common room at lightning speed. When the report finally made it to Deputy Headmistress Minerva McGonagall, she put down her pen, her expression hardening, and hurried to the headmaster's office. She pushed the door open without waiting to compose herself and paused at the sight inside. Albus Dumbledore sat in his chair as usual, and opposite him in the armchairs were Babatunde Okoye from Ouagadougou, Agatha Pickery from Ilvermorny, and Fernando Lima from Castello Bruxo. Tea steamed on the coffee table in front of them, along with plates of snacks. McGonagall was about to report when Dumbledore beat her to it. "Ah, Minerva, you're here. We already know what happened." He smiled slightly. "We've just discussed it and agree that, for spirited young wizards, a certain amount of controlled sparring can promote exchange between students from different schools." Picari added, "So we've decided to hold a dueling competition open to all students. Registration will, of course, be voluntary." McGonagall looked at the other three leaders. They had reached a consensus and showed no sign of backing down. "I understand, headmasters. If this is your joint decision." She inclined her head and prepared to leave. "Oh, Minerva, wait." Dumbledore stopped her with a sheepish smile. "About notifying the students, drawing up detailed safety protocols, arranging a suitable venue, scheduling and referees, we thought you might take the lead on coordinating those particulars. We old folk are good at the broad strokes, but the execution, well." "Very well, headmaster. I'll take care of it." McGonagall straightened her robes and left at once. It was, as the students would later joke, Dumbledore speaking, and Minerva running herself ragged. It didn't take long for a fresh notice to appear on every bulletin board across the castle. Hogwarts International Exchange Student Joint Dueling Competition, voluntary registration. Aimed at friendly sparring between schools. Generous prizes. The final winner will receive a small vial of Felix Felicis and 500 galleons. "Felix Felicis? Merlin's beard," someone exclaimed. 500 galleons. I'd have to save my pocket money until graduation. Register. I must register. There's nothing to lose, and what if I win? But we'll be fighting students from other schools. Afraid, it's our chance to show them Hogwarts level. By the fire in the Hufflepuff common room, Edgar stared at the notice with shining eyes and nudged Lynn, who was scribbling in a notebook. "Lynn, did you see that? A dueling competition. Felix Felicis. 500 galleons. Are you joining? You have to. With your level, you could win it easily." Lynn glanced up from his notes, then at the announcement. He considered it. Felix Felicis? He still had a few vials in his potion cabinet. 500 galleons? Not really an urgent lure for him. "I'm not entering," he said simply and went back to his notebook. "There's no need. What about you lot?" Edgar thumped his chest. "I'm entering, of course. Don't be ridiculous." William weighed up the spells he knew. "I can manage. I'm in." Ollie, sitting quietly, gave a small nod. Just then the system pinged in Lynn's head, the familiar chime and a task notice appearing as if on a screen only he could see. Ding. Task content. Have any one of your roommates receive a competition reward. Reward, dual augmeffect. When you duel any target, the power of your spells will be significantly increased. "Young man, do you want to try challenging Dumbledore to a 1v1? Lynn read it and raised an eyebrow. The task might be possible, but only barely. He knew his roommate's limits. Still, he smiled and turned to them. "If you're all entering, it would look bad if you didn't place, wouldn't it?" "True," Edgar said at once. "It'd be better if we could place." "All right," Lynn said with a brighter grin. "I'll give you some focused training. At the very least, you shouldn't be knocked out in the first round." They all agreed without hesitation. Lynn's spellcasting was known and respected, so they trained, registered, and debated tactics in the days that followed. Saturday arrived before they knew it. The Great Hall had been transformed. The 4 house tables were pushed back to the walls, leaving a wide-open arena in the center. Strong protective charms shimmered at the edges, translucent ripples warding against wayward spells. Spectator stands rose in tiers all around, with a few floating platforms for better viewing. The whole hall looked like a professional dueling venue. Nearly every student and teacher was present. The atmosphere buzzed with excitement. The four headmasters stood on a raised platform. They kept their remarks short, announcing the number of participants, 77, and the rules. Because of the large number of entrants, the competition will be held over 2 days, with 7 rounds in total, Dumbledore explained. In the first 6 rounds, specifically the first, second, fifth, and sixth, a lucky participant will receive a bye and advance automatically to the next round. Matchups will be determined by random draw. He swept his gaze over the students. The drawing is entirely random. You could face someone from any year or any school. If a junior draws a senior, view it as a valuable learning experience. Do your best and show courage in what you've learned. Luck is part of strength, isn't it? There's no sugarcoating it, Harry added dryly. And one more thing, no alchemical items other than authorized potions are allowed. Any use of dark arts that could have serious consequences is strictly forbidden. Professors will act as referees to ensure fairness and safety. Dumbledore clapped softly. A house elf carried a wooden box to the center of the platform and set it down. Will all participants please come forward to draw lots in the order on the list? McGonagall announced, holding a parchment. The line formed. Ollie Thorne. Ollie stepped up and reached into the box. He drew a small silver ball, and a single word gleamed across its surface. Bye. The first bye had been drawn. Lynn couldn't help the grin that spread across his face. One step closer to completing the task. The Hufflepuff table cheered and teased. Ollie looked mildly surprised, but returned to his seat without fuss. The drawing continued. Harry Potter drew number 7. The student who drew the matching number shortly after was Draco Malfoy. Shouts rose from Gryffindor and Slytherin in very different tones. Then the pairing that made the whole hall erupt. Marcus Flint drew his number, and the name that matched it was Ryan Sanderson from Ilvermorny. The two who'd publicly challenged each other in the Great Hall had been drawn against one another in the first round. McGonagall read on. Edgar Burns. Edgar beamed and reached into the box. He pulled a number out. McGonagall consulted the chart. Your opponent is William Smith. Lynn let out a wry little laugh. What rotten luck, he muttered under his breath. Well, as everyone knows, luck's conserved. Since Ollie had great luck, somebody had to be unlucky. Coincidentally, this time, it's Edgar and William. 162. Congratulations! As the last participant confirmed their opponent, a house elf took the drawing box away. Dumbledore returned to the front of the stage, a gentle smile on his face as his eyes swept over the eager young faces below. Then I announce that the Hogwarts International Exchange Student Joint Dueling Tournament begins. No sooner had his voice fallen than 2 figures strode onto the dueling platform, surrounded by protective charms. Marcus Flint and Ryan Sanderson faced one another. The air between them seemed to crackle under their glares. Professor Flitwick, acting as referee, gave a small chuckle from his stand and with a teasing tone said, It seems our first pair are impatient to strike the first spark for our tournament. Courageous. Now, take your positions. Marcus and Ryan snorted, created distance, and walked back to opposite ends of the platform. They turned crisply, raised their wands, and fixed their gazes on one another, waiting for the command. Flitwick's hand rose. His voice dropped, clear and serious. 3, 2, 1, begin! Stupefy! Petrificus totalis! The spells tore through the air like arrows, a sharp whoosh as they flew toward the opponents' faces. Marcus was ready. The instant he sent out the stunning spell, he traced a short arc with his wand. Protego! A semi-transparent silver shield materialized in front of him. Clang! The Petrificus totalis struck the shield charm dead on, rippling its surface. The shield shook, but did not break. Ryan, though, fought differently. Rather than hold his ground, he moved forward the moment he cast his binding spell. Buzz! Marcus's Stupefy missed and smashed into the protective barrier at the edge of the dueling platform, sending a ripple across it. Seeing Marcus raise a shield charm out of the corner of his eye, Ryan sharpened his expression. He didn't throw a heavier offensive spell head-on. Instead, he tipped his wand down. Slick slide! A beam shot to the floor beneath Marcus's feet. The stone became as slippery as if greased with butter. Marcus had just withstood the Petrificus and was about to drop his shield to counterattack when his feet slid out from under him. "What?" he cried. His Quidditch-honed coordination saved him. He staggered, flailing several times like a windmill, but avoided a graceless tumble. He barely kept his balance, though his posture and rhythm were ruined. Marcus could dodge the first attack, but not necessarily the 15th. As he tried to raise his wand again, Ryan had already stabilized and pointed his wand at him. "Expelliarmus!" A red light shot out. Marcus only managed to lift his wand halfway. Crack! The wand flew from his hand, spinning end over end. The disarming charm's impact drove into his chest. "Ah!" Marcus grunted, and off balance, he toppled backward, sliding past the platform's boundary and landing on the soft cushioning below. Silence hung for a moment before the crowd erupted in applause and cheering. "The victor, Ryan Sanderson, advancing to the second round," Professor Flitwick announced. Ryan walked to the platform's edge, gave a slight bow to Marcus, who was rising with a dark expression, observing dueling etiquette, and then strode off. The Ilvermorny section roared its approval, while Slytherin hissed and booed. "The match continues." Flitwick's voice cut through the noise. "Next pair, Amina Okoro versus Cedric Diggory." Amina had drawn the older student, Cedric. She stepped onto the stage without raising her wand. Cedric, calm and steady, looked every bit the exemplary Hufflepuff. Their duel swung back and forth. Amina's transfiguration shone. She flicked her hands and sent small, fast-running creatures from her sleeves to disrupt vision, made the ground sprout tripping vines, and conjured large animals to press the attack. Cedric struggled with the unexpected, agile beasts, but he remained composed. His shield charm held firm, his footwork was nimble. He didn't rush an all-out assault, but observed Amina's rhythm. Her spellcasting differed from the usual wand system, and adapted. When Amina tried to summon a swarm of butterflies to cloud his sight, Cedric seized the opening. Expelliarmus! The disarming charm came crisp and timely. Amina had no chance to mount an effective defense. She twisted, the spell grazing her arm and breaking her control over the transformed object. She was at a decisive disadvantage. Cedric didn't press the assault. He stood with his wand ready. "You can concede now." Amina rubbed her arm and smiled helplessly. Then a tiger's roar erupted from her throat. In a blink, she transformed into a tiger and lunged at Cedric. He had taken her smile for surrender and was nearly tackled, caught utterly off guard. "Repello Muggletum!" Bang! The tigress Amina was thrown off the dueling platform. "Victor, Cedric Diggory," Flitwick called. Amina reverted to human form, shrugged, and walked back with a nonchalant air. The duels continued briskly. Spells flashed across the stage, cheers, gasps, and sighs rising and falling. Soon Flitwick's voice rang out again. "Next pair, Edgar Burns versus William Smith." "Wow! A domestic match," voices from the audience commented. Lynn looked up from Dumbledore's notebook toward the stage, inwardly speechless. Damn it, one of them would be eliminated before the mission was over. Both boys stepped forward with odd expressions. Both sides, positions. 3, 2, 1, begin. Expelliarmus! Expelliarmus! They cast in unison. Two disarming charms shot from opposite ends of the stage, red lights crossing midair. Almost together, they sidestepped, avoiding the other's Expelliarmus, as if rehearsed. Stupefy, again in unison. Two stunning spells flew. Clang, clang! Shields blossomed in front of both of them, blocking the attacks. Laughter and applause rippled through the audience. Lynn pressed a hand to her forehead. The students hadn't broken the shield techniques she'd taught them. The duel settled into a stalemate. Each probed for an opening, casting spells that the other's protego, or nimble dodging, neutralized. It was like two evenly matched knights feeling each other out. William, however, had been thinking faster. He realized this back and forth was a war of attrition unlikely to yield a quick win. He recalled Lynn's old rogue tactics from the Forbidden Forest. His disillusionment charm wasn't the best, but he could resort to dirty tricks. After blocking yet another stupefy from Edgar, William pointed his wand at the air. "Avis!" A flock of tiny chirping birds exploded into being, flapping and swarming toward Edgar. They did almost no damage, but they alarmed and interfered with vision. Edgar was caught off guard and instinctively raised his wand. "Protego!" The shield rose and the birds battered against it, dissolving into feathers and motes of light. That, however, created a problem. The semi-transparent shield temporarily obscured Edgar's vision, blocking his view of William. Just as the bird attack faded and Edgar prepared to peer through, Lumos! William flashed an intensely blinding light from his wand tip. Ah! Edgar screwed his eyes shut, tears streaming as the glare whitened his vision. William seized the opening he had created. Expelliarmus! Crack! Edgar's wand flew out of his hand. When the light faded and Edgar wiped his stinging eyes, William was already holding the wand. Victor William Smith! Flitwick announced. Edgar slapped his forehead in frustration, then smiled ruefully. He crossed the stage and clapped William on the shoulder. Not bad. You've picked up some bad habits from Lynn. William adjusted his glasses. If you're weak, then... Shut up! Watching Edgar leave the platform, Lynn delivered a final barb. Congratulations, you're also a first-round exit. Edgar shot back without missing a beat as he walked away. You shut up, too! Next, we proceed to the second round of the draw. As another pair of contestants finished, Professor Flitwick's voice bounced off the rafters of the Great Hall. The audience refocused on the arena in the center. A house elf dragged the wooden chest forward again. The drawing was tense and orderly, but when the second-round pairings were projected into the air, gasps rippled through the hall. The list showed the matchups for the next round, and in one slot it read plainly, Ollie Thorne. Bye-bye again, a Ravenclaw blurted. Merlin's smelly socks. How is that possible? He had a bye in the first round. 2 in a row? That's impossible luck. Next thing you know, they'll put him straight in the finals. But fate seemed determined to teach a lesson about probability. Time and again, whenever a bye came up, the name that followed was Ollie Thorne. When he did draw an opponent, the rival was never particularly strong. Lynn was ecstatic, practically frothing at the mouth. To him, this was clearly destiny paving the way for the prize. Still, there was doubt. Ollie's streak of good fortune bred suspicion. Some whispered he'd used a confundus charm or some lucky charm to influence the chest. Others muttered that the fat friar had been helping him, though the ghost protested ignorance. The matter was taken seriously. Dumbledore and the other 3 headmasters inspected the wooden chest, examined the enchantments on it, and confirmed its randomness and anti-tampering protections were intact. They even took turns using detection charms to examine Ollie himself. Finally, Dumbledore announced to everyone, after repeated confirmation, Mr. Ollie Thorne did not use any magical means to interfere with the draw. His consecutive byes are, indeed, purely due to good luck. According to Wozgashork's law of luck conservation, enormous good fortune for one person must mean misfortune for someone else. In this case, William Smith seemed to be the unlucky one. In the second round draw, he was matched against Ryan, who had easily beaten Marcus. William tried everything, defensive spells, clever tactics, but he couldn't work a miracle against Ryan. He was soundly defeated, sent sprawling on stage, and left the tournament with the rueful distinction of second-round exit. Sunday morning, the Great Hall thrummed with excitement. After 6 grueling rounds and 1 student string of byes, the final was at last upon them. The winner would take the small vial of Felix Felicis and 500 galleons. Spectator stands were full. All 4 houses and the visiting schools, everyone, focused on the dueling platform. In such a charged atmosphere, there are always people ready to make a bit of profit. The Weasley twins threaded through the crowd with a tray stacked with glittering galleons and sickles, and a small blackboard by their side displaying live odds. Placing bets, ladies and gentlemen, Fred purred in an exaggerated whisper. Finals odds. Ilvermorny's Ryan Sanderson versus Hogwarts' Star of Luck, Ollie Thorne. Odds updating in real time. Place your bets. When they reached the Hufflepuff section, they spotted Lynn, fresh from Ollie's side. Hey, Lynn, want to support our business? George pushed the tray toward him and winked. Ollie's odds are a bit steep, but what if? Risk it, and a Thestral might turn into a phoenix. Lynn set his cup down and looked at the tray. Almost 95% of the money was on Ryan. He reached into his robe, took out a heavy leather bag, and without hesitation dropped it in the center of the tray. I'm betting on a draw. The twins froze. Fred leaned in and hissed. Merlin, he's actually betting on a draw? This money's hot to hold. George gave Lynn an admiring look, cleared his throat, and said, bets are placed. We won't take them back. Good luck, Lynn. He tucked the bag away, and the two scurried off in search of their next customer, half afraid their gambler might change his mind. Professor Flitwick's voice cut through the murmurs. Finalists, take your positions. Ollie and Ryan stepped onto the dueling platform from opposite sides. Ollie was his usual quiet self. He had his wand in one hand, and in the other, he still held the leather case that usually housed it, as if he hadn't had time to put it away. They stood, turned to face each other, and raised their wands. Begin, Flitwick cried. The duel erupted. Ryan opened with a relentless barrage. Stupefy, Petrificus totalis, Expelliarmus, Legilimens. Spell after spell slammed into Ollie. He raised a protego, and the shield sprang up, taking the blows with dull thuds. The magical barrier wavered violently as he tried to hold it together. He tried to reply with Expelliarmus and Stupefy, but Ryan dodged or interrupted him each time. Ryan controlled the tempo masterfully, giving Ollie no time to cast with steady concentration. Luck isn't on his side this time, someone sighed. Against overwhelming offense, defense, and occasional counters couldn't hold forever. Predictably, during one hail of attacks, Ollie's shield shattered beneath a powerful Expelliarmus from Ryan. The charm burst into motes of light, and its residual force struck Ollie full on. He grunted, his wand spun from his hand and flew into Ryan's grasp. The impact threw Ollie backward. He rolled toward the edge of the platform, nearly tumbling off, and lay there, dazed and unable to rise. A smile spread across Ryan's face as he turned toward his supporters. The Ilvermorny section stood, ready to cheer. Professor Flitwick took a step forward, convinced the match was decided. Expelliarmus, he began to say, moving to announce the victor. Then a red jolt shot out at a dangerous angle. Ryan, facing his schoolmates, hadn't expected a strike from behind. Crack! The curse hit the back of his hand. From weakness or surprise, it snarled through him with painful force, and two wands slipped free from his grip, flying through the air and landing in the hands of the still-prone Ollie. Silence fell. Then the hall erupted like oil and water. 3 wands? When did he pull those out? Is that allowed? The rules say nothing about bringing spare wands. This is outrageous. Now Ryan's disarmed and Ollie has the advantage? Flitwick stood open-mouthed. Normally, if a duelist is disarmed and nearly out of bounds, the match would end. But now the party who seemed defeated had somehow produced spare wands and disarmed the presumed winner. The situation lay well outside the scope of the rules as written. Ilvermorny students shouted that Ollie's move was underhanded and possibly illegal. Hogwarts pupils countered that if nothing in the rules forbade it, it was fair play, and that Ollie's quick thinking deserved praise. Voices rose and tempers flared. It threatened to come to blows in the stands. Dumbledore rose. "Order," he said, and his voice carried. "An unexpected situation has arisen in the final. I will confer with the other headmasters before announcing a decision." He nodded to the other 3. The 4 headmasters left the noisy hall together, heading to a quiet lounge nearby. The wait scraped at everyone's nerves. At last the lounge door opened and the foursome returned. Dumbledore walked to the front, surveyed the 2 contestants and the assembled crowd, and spoke slowly. "After careful deliberation among the 4 of us," he said, "I announce that the final result of the International Exchange Student Dueling Tournament is a draw. A draw. Therefore, the competition rewards, the vial of Felix Felicis and the 500 galleons, will be split equally between Mr. Ollie Thorne and Mr. Ryan Sanderson." The verdict was unexpected, but to many, sensible. For a few stunned seconds, the great hall was quiet. Then the sound swelled into a tangled blend of cheers, polite applause, and frustrated groans. After brief checks to ensure both duelists were unharmed, Ollie and Ryan walked to the center and accepted their rewards to the crowd's witness. A soft chime from somewhere in Ollie's pocket had nothing to do with the proceedings. Ding! Mission complete. Reward has been issued. Afterwards, the Weasley twins slunk back to Lynn with downcast faces. "Your galleons," Fred offered. Lynn looked up. "Did your betting go sour?" The twins exchanged a glance and shook their heads. "We lost a bit. We both bet on Ryan to win." Lynn simply stared at them. Then he said nothing. Wondered 64. What does this have to do with me? October 31st, 1993, Halloween afternoon. The weather was pleasant, the autumn sun warm and lazy over Hogwarts. Lynn checked his backpack, which bulged with a fishing rod, a folding chair, assorted baits, and an alchemy book to pass the time, then headed for the Black Lake in a fairly cheerful mood. It was Sunday and the perfect day for fishing. Someone, however, seemed determined to spoil his plans. Just as he reached the area near the entrance hall, two figures slid out from the side and blocked his path, one on each side. On the left stood Amina in her Uagado robes. On the right, Ryan in his Ilvermorny uniform. Lynn stopped and regarded the two roadblocks from different continents, an eyebrow raised. "What's the matter, you two? The weather's nice. Why aren't you out flying a few laps at the pitch or debating international magical theory in the library? Why are you blocking me?" Ryan offered a polite smile and spoke first. "We're exchange students at Hogwarts, and we haven't been to Hogsmeade yet. Since we're leaving soon, shouldn't you, being a Hogwarts student, fulfill your duty as a host and take us on a tour?" He said it as if it were obvious, as if it would be a grave insult if Lynn didn't comply. Lynn was momentarily speechless. "Ryan, I already told you, I don't have permission to go to Hogsmeade. You can go by yourselves. Just go out the castle gates, follow the main road. There's the village and the signs are clear. Or, if you're bored of walking, you could come fishing with me by the lake. I'll lend you a rod." He shifted to squeeze between them. "Hey, don't be in such a hurry." Amina stepped across and blocked him again. "Look at this." She produced a neatly folded piece of parchment from her pocket and shoved it into Lynn's hand without a word. He frowned, unfolded it, and read. It was a permission slip bearing the Hogwarts seal. "I, Albus Dumbledore, headmaster of Hogwarts School of Witchcraft and Wizardry, hereby grant permission for Lynn to travel to Hogsmeade Village during extracurricular hours, provided he complies with school rules and relevant Ministry of Magic regulations. Effective immediately." A line of small print below read, "Special approval granted at the friendly request of the Uagadu and Ilvermorny exchange students. May your visit to Hogsmeade be pleasant." Lynn stared at the slip, then at the two smiling faces in front of him. No, was this really necessary? He didn't know whether to laugh or cry. "You went to Headmaster Dumbledore for a hall pass just to get me to Hogsmeade? What did you tell him, that I'm antisocial and need social correction?" He couldn't imagine what story they'd spun to get Dumbledore to sign it. "So, aren't you touched?" Amina leaned in, grinning. Lynn sneered. "Honestly, Hogsmeade isn't that special. Honeydukes has more candy, the butterbeer at the Three Broomsticks is all right, and Zonko's is noisy. It's not as interesting as relaxing and fishing." Ryan crossed his arms. "Just say whether you're coming." The subtext was clear. "We got you the permission slip, and we've cornered you. Today you're going to Hogsmeade whether you like it or not, though they couldn't literally force him." "Fine, fine," Lynn waved his hand. "If I'm the guide, I'm the guide. But let's be clear. I'll show you around and point out the main shops. Any purchases are your responsibility. Don't expect me to be your guide and wallet. I already give you a generous cut of the profits." In the end, Lynn led them along the main road toward Hogsmeade. The autumn scenery was pleasant, trees turning gold and crimson, rolling hills in the distance. He offered a casual running commentary. "Over there's the Shrieking Shack. Supposedly haunted. Snape once left a bottle of a truly foul potion in there. If you smell anything bad, that's probably it. Walk a bit further, and you'll see the village." When they arrived, the fragile alliance between the three immediately dissolved. Ryan's intention was clear. "See you later at the Three Broomsticks," he said, and headed straight for the shops deeper in the village that sold magical materials, rare herbs, and creature byproducts. He clearly planned to stock up on supplies harder to get in America. Lynn had no urgent need for materials. He shrugged and looked to Amina. "What about you? Where do you want to go?" Amina scanned the village with delight. "Honeydukes first. And, oh, there's a pet shop." The buzzing pet shop was lively, full of sounds and smells from various creatures. Amina was fascinated by several of the animals, but her attention settled on a small creature curled on a cushion. A ginger kitten that looked ordinary at first glance, but with long tufts of hair on its ear tips, rare amber eyes, and a tail more flexible and powerful than any normal cat's. The shop assistant explained it was a half-blood cat with Kneasel ancestry. Amina fell in love at once. After a bit of bargaining, she bought the kitten and named it Kaya, a Wagadu-style name meaning agile hunter. The kitten nuzzled her hand contentedly, purring. They left the pet shop together, Amina cradling her new pet, and planned to meet up with Ryan soon. As they walked toward the material shops, something in a shadowed corner a short distance ahead caught Amina's eye. A large black dog sat there, scrawny but big-boned, its fur matted and dirty. It sat quietly, eyes scanning the passing wizards and lingering just a moment longer on students in Hogwarts robes. When the dog's gaze met Amina's, she hesitated. Their eyes locked. She tapped Lynn, who was occupied with Kaya, and pointed toward the dog. The sudden gesture seemed to startle the already alert animal. It jolted then, without a second's hesitation, bolted, its forepaws pushing off in a blur as it vanished into the darker recesses of a nearby alley. "What's up?" Lynn looked where she'd pointed but saw only an empty corner and some trash cans. Confused, he glanced back. "Nothing. There was just a black dog," Amina said, withdrawing her finger. Then she added uneasily, "It felt off, like it might be an animagus." Lynn looked at her. "What does this have to do with me?" The words barely left his mouth when his pocket, or maybe his head, pinged with an impossible notification. Ding. Mission objective. Ensure the traitor who betrayed Ollie's mother is punished. Effect. Ability to cast spells while in animagus form. Note. You must already have an animagus form first. If you do, ignore this message. Lynn froze. He hadn't learned animagus transformation. That wasn't even the point. The objective named a traitor who betrayed Ollie's mother, and they were standing in Hogsmeade. Amina had just pointed out a suspicious black dog. Ollie's mother? A traitor. Black dog. Animagus. The connection snapped into place in Lynn's head. The black dog very likely meant Sirius Black, the wanted man everyone was whispering about, the one rumored to have betrayed the Potters. If the mission was about punishing the traitor who betrayed Ollie's mother, and a suspected animagus black dog had just been spotted here, the implications were chilling. "Amina," Lynn said abruptly, urgency sharpening his voice. "Nature calls. Go find Ryan at the Three Broomsticks first. I'll be right back." "Huh? What emergency? You?" Amina held the pet carrier, bewildered. Before she could finish, Lynn had already taken off, bolting down the street. 165. I'll come again next time. The perspective returned to Lynn. After slipping away with the flimsy excuse of a bathroom break, he hadn't actually gone looking for a toilet. Instead, he turned down a relatively secluded alley just off the main street. Sunlight barely reached between the buildings. The lane was deserted, except for a few cockroaches skittering around the rims of trash cans. Lynn searched every corner, behind stacked crates, through the gaps of half-open broken doors, into the shadow under the eaves. After several minutes of careful inspection, all he found were messy footprints in the dust and a small tuft of coarse hair tucked in one corner. He pinched the tuft between finger and thumb and held it up to the light. It was black, stiff, and stained. He assumed it must be the dog hair left by that black dog when it bolted. Lynn drew his wand and aimed at the tuft. The tip of his wand pulsed faintly. The hair, as if given a pulse of life, rose from his palm, trembled a few seconds, then, pulled by an invisible thread, shot down the alley with a whoosh. Lynn didn't hesitate and followed. The floating tuft led him through a maze of alleys and side streets in Hogsmeade, turning left and right with tidy precision. He kept his guard up, certain it would lead him to his quarry. Finally, after winding past the back of Honeyduke's, the hare stopped in front of a shop. He looked up at the sign, written in elegant script, Gladrag's Wizardwear. Before Lynn could puzzle over why a dog would come here, the tuft floated straight through the shop door and slipped inside. Lynn hesitated only a moment before following. A bell chimed softly. The interior was warmly lit and scented with fresh incense. Shelves and hooks displayed a dazzling variety of garments. Well-dressed witches and wizards whispered and fussed in front of mirrors. The tuft drifted toward a shelf by the counter that held grooming tools and brushes. Under Lynn's stare, it landed on a brush. He understood then. That wasn't dog hair at all. He had been led all over half of Hogsmeade by a tuft of bristles from a tailor's brush. "Sir?" A uniformed shop assistant appeared at just the right moment, his eyes sweeping over the Hogwarts robes Lynn still wore. His voice was polite. Are you looking for a custom robe, or would you like to see our ready-made styles? Gladrags can accommodate any build, comfortable and proper for everyday wear or formal occasions. Lynn felt a flush of embarrassment. He glanced at the expensive robes on display and down at his slightly shabby school robe. Yes. He cleared his throat. I'd like to see something for everyday use, comfortable but smarter than school robes. Of course, sir. This way, please. The assistant smiled as he led Lynn to a counter bearing swatches of colors and fabrics. Let me take your measurements and recommend a few practical but fashionable options. For example, this blend with mithril thread is light and warm, has a woven constant temperature charm, and is extremely durable, perfect for long days around the castle. Over half an hour later, Lynn stepped out of Gladrags in a new outfit. The cloth stretched and moved effortlessly across his shoulders. You get what you pay for, he thought, pleased. The ancestors weren't wrong. He decided he'd come back. As for tracking the black dog, he'd lost the trail, and there was no point forcing it. He glanced up at the sky and headed toward the 3 broomsticks to meet Amina and Ryan. The trio wandered Hogsmeade together until it was time to return for the castle's Halloween feast. They hurried into the Great Hall and took their places at the long table. Dumbledore and the 3 visiting headmasters entered and sat at the staff table. After a brief concluding speech, Dumbledore announced, smiling, "Let the feast begin." Plates filled instantly with a sumptuous spread. Lynn ate well, but kept a watchful eye out. His experience told him Hogwarts Halloween feasts often hid dangers, from a first-year troll to a second-year basilisk. Still, the meal passed without incident. From appetizers to main courses to desserts, everything went smoothly. When Dumbledore finally called an end and reminded everyone of curfew, Lynn felt almost unnerved by how ordinary it all had been. The next morning, the entire school and visiting delegates gathered on the front lawn to see the visiting teachers and students off. There were no long speeches, just thanks from the 3 headmasters to Dumbledore and the Hogwarts staff, and warm invitations for future visits. Then, as they had arrived, the weather turned. Dark clouds rolled in and thunder rumbled. A torrent of rain fell like a waterfall, and bolts of blinding lightning struck where the groups from Castellabruxo and Ilvermorny stood. Water and lightning intertwined. When the light died away, both groups were gone. White mists then rose from the grass, curling and billowing, wrapping Uagado's teachers and students in a hazy curtain. When the mist finally thinned, they too had vanished. The bustle of the international exchange evaporated as quickly as it had come. The castle fell back into its usual rhythms. Even the loathsome Dementors, now under ministry orders, were redeployed to the outskirts of Hogwarts and around Hogsmeade. That day's potions lesson smelled particularly foul, somewhere between overcooked cabbage and rotting entrails. Professor Snape, as ever, took delight in pointing out every student's mistakes with surgical precision. Lynn's performance was, as usual, steady. The draught of peace he brewed had the color and texture described in the textbook. When the bell rang, he packed his things, left a bottle of the draught in the designated area, and moved for the door with the other students. He had almost crossed the threshold when a voice stopped him. Lynn. It wasn't loud, but it made several students in the corridor stiffen and hurry away. Lynn turned to see Snape fixed on him. "Follow me," the professor said without another word, sweeping his black robes as he strode toward his office. Lynn followed slowly behind Snape through the corridors of Hogwarts. The potions master's face was darker than usual. When Snape opened his office door, an almost physical, indescribably nasty smell rushed out and hit Lynn in the face. Ugh! His eyelids fluttered and he choked. Almost by reflex, he tapped his fortin and a transparent, bubble-like membrane instantly wrapped around his head, sealing out the stench. Snape had already moved behind his desk. He turned, saw Lynn standing in the doorway with a bubble around his head, and his lips pinched into a thin line. Unauthorized use of 12 in a professor's office. Hufflepuff will lose. He stopped mid-sentence, as if remembering something. Snape had summoned this Hufflepuff boy. In some ways he needed a favor, or at least cooperation. After a brief struggle, he swallowed the automatic deduction and let out a cold snort. Lynn, blinking, said, Professor? No deduction?" He wanted to smack himself as soon as the words left his mouth. He'd forgotten how quickly a loose tongue cost points. Of course, Snape's expression darkened. After staring at Lynn for a few seconds, the professor ground out, "Hufflepuff, 10 points from Hufflepuff, for your foolish garrulousness, and," he glanced at the bubble, "continued disrespect." A mental image of slapping the faced APG flashed through Lynn's mind. Damn it, again. Why hadn't he learned? He blamed Dudu's constant bickering for infecting his speech. He certainly wasn't taking the bubblehead charm off now that points had been taken. Once the small interlude ended, Snape returned to business. He leaned against his desk, arms folded, eyes fixed on Lynn. "1," he said. "Do you remember how to brew it?" Lynn was surprised by the sudden change of subject, but nodded. "Yes, Professor, I remember." Snape hesitated, choosing his words carefully. "The unique smelling kind." Lynn's mind instantly flashed back to the first potion they'd brewed that term, a blend that combined the scent of two and lutefisk. He imagined Snape had some very odd tastes, but he kept his expression composed. "Yes, Professor, I remember that too." Snape seemed satisfied with that answer. He pointed to a cleared workbench in the corner, where a clean copper cauldron and tools were waiting. "Brew it here. I'll watch." The command left no room for argument. Lynn moved to the bench and found that the main ingredients for a standard one were already arranged on a small shelf. Even the less common additives he had used last time to create the unique smell were set out. He muttered under his breath. Snape was very well prepared and rolled up his sleeves. He checked the freshness and preparation of the ingredients, then opened several drawers in the herb cabinet, pulling out a few extra packets. Dried swamp worm secretion crystals, pollen from a mutated wormwood harvested only on a full moon, and a small bottle of concentrated kaba gland extract that smelled like rotten fish and onions. Snape said nothing. He stood a safe distance from the bench where he could see everything without risk of splattering, his dark eyes unblinking as he observed each of Lynn's movements. Lynn began the careful, methodical brewing. Snape watched from the side, arms folded, but there was a keen attention on his face that rarely showed, more curiosity than sarcasm now. He watched Lynn control the heat and the potion's reactions, watched the precise way he added the odious ingredients, and once or twice he even nodded slightly. So it can be done like that, Snape thought. Why didn't I consider that? Time passed in the small office to the sound of the cauldron's gurgle, the faint scrape of a stirring rod, and the soft rustle of ingredients being measured. At last the potion reached its final stage. The unique scent, Two's cloying saltiness, lutefisk's sour ammonia, damp swamp decay, and odd spices, thickened until it nearly hung in the air itself. Even inside his bubble, Lynn could picture how foul it must be. Snape stepped forward, took a crystal vial, held it up to the dim light, and very cautiously inhaled the faint residue at the vial's mouth. For a moment his gaze wandered, and a memory seemed to cross his face. Remus Lupin's pale complexion, his unsteady walk, the days of poor appetite and weakness after the last full moon. A small, almost pleased expression flickered and disappeared. He placed the vial carefully into a cabinet as if it were something to be locked away. With a dismissive wave, Snape said, "You may go." Lynn cleaned the workbench, put the equipment away, gave a polite nod, and left the office. He walked back to the Hufflepuff common room more slowly than usual, mentally turning the situation over. Why had Snape asked him to brew a cauldron of one? The potion's purpose was specific. It helped werewolves keep their sanity during the full moon, eased the pain of transformation, and prevented them from losing themselves entirely. It wasn't a tonic or a pleasant beverage. The ordinary version was barely palatable and could even cause serious side effects if brewed or dosed incorrectly. So whoever needed this potion had to be a werewolf. And Snape's attitude toward the potion's smell was telling. He'd insisted on the unique odor and prepared the added ingredients to make it especially foul. That suggested he wasn't doing this out of fondness. He knew the werewolf and their relationship must be bad. Bad enough that while he was obliged to provide the potion, he made sure it would be unpleasant to take. Lynn thought through the timing. The key to a werewolf's problem was the full moon. He replayed class schedules and teachers' leave records from the past month. Only one teacher had been on leave around the last full moon, Professor Lupin. The pieces fit too neatly. Lynn felt his deduction was solid, but he planned to verify it. The next full moon was only a few days away. Defense against the dark arts. Professor Lupin looked off today. He stood behind the podium, paler than usual, deeper shadows under his eyes, and the gentle smile at the corners of his mouth seemed a little forced. He coughed softly and patted a cage beside him, covered with a thick cloth, as if to steer attention away from his face. "Class, today will still be a practical lesson," Lupin said in his usual mild voice. "According to a certain professor who reported to me, because of some special circumstances in teaching over the past 2 years, most of you might be a little lacking in practical defense foundations." He put it tactfully, without naming names. A ripple of knowing laughter moved through the room. A Ravenclaw girl in the front muttered, "Who says our foundations are weak? We've defeated trolls, vampires, yetis." Lupin replied, frowning, because that was not at all what Dumbledore had told him when briefing him on the students. The Ravenclaw girl, seeing his confused look, suppressed a laugh and added, "In Professor Lockhart's stage plays." "Ha!" The room erupted. Lupin hesitated, then allowed his mouth to twitch with amusement. Once the laughter died down, he set his hand on the cloth. "No matter how thrilling those previous adventures were, today we'll be meeting a magical creature that requires careful handling." He drew the cloth away. In the cage peered a strange, small bird, whose feathers were a clashing patchwork of colors, as if old plumes from several species had been stitched together. "A fooper," Lupin announced. "I asked Hagrid to find a relatively docile one in the Forbidden Forest. Can anyone tell me the fooper's most dangerous trait?" William raised his hand almost instantly. "It's song, Professor. It sounds unpleasant, but it attacks the listener's mind. Prolonged exposure will drive you mad." "Quite right, Mr. Smith." Lupin nodded approvingly. 5 points to Hufflepuff. He turned to the class. "The fooper's song is a subtle mental assault. If you encounter one in the wild and don't know how to defend against it—" He paused, then, with a faint smile, added, "You might be better off having downed a large glass of brandy first. In that case, the worst it will do is make you a bit dizzy rather than completely unhinged." Lupin went on to explain the fooper's habits, the signs that it was about to sing, and the basic counterspells. He taught with his usual care, though his speech was a touch slower than normal, and he kept taking small, shallow breaths. "All right, that's enough theory," he said, clapping his hands. "Now for the most important defensive spell for this lesson." He raised his wand, demonstrating the standard wrist rotation and stressing each syllable clearly. "Pay attention to my wrist rotation and syllable stress. Langlock." Langlock. The class repeated in unison, wands tracing the motion through the air. For the rest of the period, the room filled with the rise and fall of incantations and the swish of wand strokes. The lesson passed quickly. When the bell rang, Lupin looked almost relieved. He assigned a short essay, then, looking a little fatigued, tidied his notes on the podium, picked up the covered fooper cage, and slowly stepped down, preparing to leave. Students gathered their things and spilled out in small groups, chatting. Lynn packed up more slowly, his eyes fixed on Lupin's back. Just as Lupin reached the classroom door, Lynn sped up, clutching a few books as if in a hurry to his next class. "Professor, sorry, let me through," he called, and then, deliberately, his foot slipped and his shoulder collided solidly with Lupin. "Ah!" Lupin stumbled, taken by surprise. Lynn quickly steadied him, face contrite, and supported his arm. "I'm so sorry, Professor. I was running too fast. Are you all right?" Lupin caught his breath, looked at the apologetic student, and waved him off. "It's all right. Just be careful next time. Don't run in the corridors." He assumed it was an accident, a clumsy student. After a little admonition, he carried the cage back to his office. A few days later, that evening at the Hufflepuff table, Lynn ate a chicken leg while a cluster of Gryffindors, fresh from Snape's substitute defense lesson, burst in, indignant. "Blast it! Snape's absolutely mad today," Ron complained loudly, flopping onto a bench. He spent the whole lesson nitpicking. Harry's spell worked perfectly, but Snape docked 10 points because he didn't say, "Thank you, Professor." "When will Professor Lupin be back?" another Gryffindor asked, still shaken. Harry sighed. "Snape's defense is more like potions than potions class itself." "Yeah, come back soon, Professor Lupin," they chorused, voices full of longing. Their sincerity made it sound as if Lupin had been sorely missed. Lynn paused mid-bite. He checked the time. Tonight was the full moon. He calmly produced a parchment map from his pocket, the lines simple and clear: Hogwarts, the grounds, and Hogsmeade. He tapped the tiny rune that marked himself. Reveal. The lines shimmered and a faint dot appeared on the map, not inside the castle or the hospital wing, but out on the edge of the grounds, toward Hogsmeade. Shrieking Shack. He remembered the last time he and the twins had slipped through the secret passage. The smell of a potion had lingered in the tunnel. Lynn was now 98% certain of what he suspected. The remaining 2% was only because he hadn't seen Lupin himself yet. He finished his chicken leg, dashed out of the Great Hall, and ran for the secret passage beneath the Humping Willow. Lynn crept up to the Humping Willow. He grabbed a withered branch from the ground, and with a casual flick of his wand, the stick snapped into a metal pole several meters long. Finding a gap in the trunk, he jabbed the pole like a bolt of lightning and struck a knot. The willow's frantically thrashing branches froze and sagged obediently, revealing a hidden tunnel entrance at the base of the tree. The passage hadn't changed since his last visit. Lynn lit the tip of his pole and moved forward on tiptoe. A familiar, complex odor drifted from the dark ahead, growing stronger the deeper he went. His face tightened. Merlin, he really regretted brewing that potion. Having a transparent bubble covering his head made sneaking around even more conspicuous. After a short way with the bubblehead charm in place, the passage began to slope upward, and a faint light leaked through gaps between the floorboards. Lynn stopped and didn't rush out. First, he cast the disillusionment charm over himself, his outline and colors blurred into the dim surroundings. Then he murmured a small scent-warding charm to keep his own smell from escaping. He remembered being sniffed out in the Chamber of Secrets last time, better safe than sorry. Feeling a little steadier, Lynn slipped out of the tunnel. The interior of the Shrieking Shack opened up, and it was as bleak and ramshackle as ever. The two-story wooden house looked ready to collapse, its walls patched with a few broken boards, no proper doors or windows. Only thin slivers of light filtered through the cracks, catching dust motes in the gloom. He moved soundlessly across the first floor. Broken furniture lay everywhere: a table with a snapped leg, chair fragments, an empty bookshelf overturned. Everything thickly coated in dust, untouched for years. No sign of Professor Lupin. Lynn's eyes went to the stairs. The second floor was even emptier, but at its center, on a shabby four-poster bed that barely held together, something lay curled. It wasn't human. It was a werewolf. A humanoid body covered in coarse gray fur, a wolf's head with a long snout, teeth flashing dully in the gloom. Its chest rose and fell in slow sleep. Lynn pulled the Marauder's-style map from his pocket. The mark for Lupin sat precisely where the creature lay, absolutely unmoved. He was 100% certain. Remus Lupin, Hogwarts' Defense Against the Dark Arts professor, was a werewolf. The secret was uncovered. That was enough. Staying any longer was too dangerous. He backed toward the tunnel to retreat. The werewolf on the bed snapped awake without warning. A panicked howl tore out of its throat, half instinct, half dream rattle, followed by a flailing paw as if to swat away a nightmare. At the same time, something clicked in the corner. Several dusty, lamp-like fixtures hanging from the rafters guttered and then came alive with steady, dim light, banishing the darkness on the upper floor. Lynn's heart jumped. Thankfully, his disillusionment and the scent ward held, and he began to retreat again. Lupin shook his head, eyes sweeping the room, nose twitching. He scanned the floor, the broken furniture, the exposed beams, and then stopped near the top of the stairs. Where dust had lain undisturbed, faint outlines of footprints now showed under the light. His pupils narrowed. Someone had been here. Lupin let out a deep, commanding howl. The peeled wallpaper of the shack shuddered and blazed. Runes flared along the walls, floor and ceiling, knitting together into a massive three-dimensional barrier that sealed the entire Shrieking Shack. A red flare burst at the exit of the secret tunnel. A curtain of light sealed the retreat, cutting the interior off from the outside. Lynn's eyes scanned the complex runes, anti-apparition wards, anti-translocation spells. This wouldn't be easy. He considered calling Wuan for an emergency space jump. Maybe that would ignore the anti-apparition defenses. Before he could decide, a burst of red fire detonated in front of him with a boom. The flame retracted, and a figure stepped out. Dumbledore, obviously roused from a very private situation, in a dressing gown and plush slippers. He looked for all the world ridiculous and suddenly exposed. Dumbledore's gaze swept the shack. It lingered for a heartbeat in Lynn's area. For an instant, their eyes met. Dumbledore's expression slid into practiced calm. Then he bent to check the floor. Finding no ashes or telltale traces, he allowed himself a nearly imperceptible breath of relief. Footsteps creaked on the stairs as Lupin descended. He pointed toward the sealed tunnel exit. Dumbledore nodded and gave him an assuring look. "Don't worry, Remus. Probably just an overly curious student who wandered in." At that, Dumbledore's eyes flicked back to where Lynn stood. "Wouldn't you say so?" Lynn extinguished his disillusionment, stepped forward, and gave an awkward little cough to break the silence. "Good evening, Headmaster Professor. The moon tonight is quite moon-like." Lupin, standing nearby, twitched the corner of his mouth when he heard that, his eyes accusing as he looked at Dumbledore and Lynn. "Those two, have they even considered my feelings? I'm a werewolf." Fortunately, Dumbledore still had a conscience and didn't press his occasional, unpredictable jokes about the moon. He reined in his smile. "Now then, child, can you tell me why you're, well, here at such a time and in such a place?" Lynn glanced at Lupin and decided to tell a partial truth. Professor Snape asked me a few days ago to help him brew a uniquely scented potion." He briefly explained how Snape's unusual request had led him to suspect Lupin might be a werewolf, the potion's specific purpose, Professor Lupin's recurring absences, and so on. "So I wanted to see if my deduction was right." Dumbledore nodded slightly. As long as Lynn hadn't come to slaughter anyone, all was well. For the old headmaster, who had seen far stranger troubles, that was good news. Lupin, on the other hand, reacted very differently. When he heard uniquely scented potion, the wolfish expression in his face turned sharp and complex. If that look could be translated into words, it would have sounded something like, "Damn it, so it was you, kid. You're the one who brewed that pot of biochemical nonsense?" Lynn felt Lupin's accusatory stare and rubbed his nose awkwardly. "Professor, you won't blame me, right? I was just following Professor Snape's instructions." Lupin stared for a beat, then let out a breathy, involuntary little howl, a woo, which in the tone of the moment meant, "I won't." Lynn seized the opening and breathed a sigh of relief. "That's great. Don't worry, Professor. Next time I definitely won't make it so, flavorful," he promised solemnly. Whether Snape would brew it himself next time was none of Lynn's business. Lupin nodded, thinking, as expected of a good Hufflepuff, understanding and ready to make amends. Once their exchange wound down, Dumbledore cleared his throat. "Ahem, it's getting late." He looked at Lupin. "Remus, you should get some rest. I'll take Lynn back to the castle." Turning to Lynn, he added, "Don't worry. I trust Lynn will understand the sensitivity of this matter and keep your secret." With that, Dumbledore led the way back to Hogwarts. After they left, the shrieking shack fell quiet again. And then the familiar scene at the headmaster's office came back into focus. Familiar portraits, familiar chairs. Lynn found himself once more sitting opposite Dumbledore. The headmaster didn't speak right away. His fingertips tapped the desk, as if choosing his words. After a moment, he spoke slowly. "Remus will be grateful you helped him keep this secret. It's very important to him." Lynn gave an awkward little laugh and thought, "Don't make that sound like I actually promised." I haven't. Don't say that." Dumbledore seemed to see the mischief in his expression and smiled faintly. Without another word, he rose and went to the bookshelf. His hand passed over countless spines and notes before coming to rest on an exceptionally old-looking notebook. He pulled it free and handed it to Lynn. "As recognition for your exploratory spirit and as the encouragement you might need," his voice twinkled with amusement, "this is Nicholas Flamel's." Dumbledore hadn't even finished the sentence before Lynn's eyes lit up. At the name Nicholas Flamel, his hand shot out and seized the notebook, clutching it to his chest as if the headmaster might change his mind. "I'll keep the secret, Professor," Lynn declared, suddenly very solemn. "Absolutely. Mum's the word. I swear it." Dumbledore surveyed his eager, profitably forgetful pupil and waved a hand. "Very well. Off you go, then." "Understood. Thank you, Headmaster. Good night." Lynn nodded, clutching the notebook, and dashed for the door. He yanked it open and shot out, the bang rattling dust from the frame. The portrait of Phineas Nigellus harumphed in disapproval. Tsk, young people these days, no composure at all. Lynn tore through the castle corridors like a gust of wind, Nicholas Flamel's notebook hugged in his arms, his heart pounding with excitement. Last time it had been Dumbledore's notebook, this time Flamel's, next time he could hardly imagine. He flung open the Hufflepuff boys' dormitory door with a kick. Edgar, in the middle of a game of wizard's chess with Ollie, was so startled his hand shook and a knight nearly sent his queen flying. He turned to see Lynn storming in, clutching the notebook. "You're back?" Edgar raised an eyebrow. "Where did you run off to this time?" "Secret." Lynn shut down further questioning with a single word. Edgar clicked his tongue in annoyance. Fine, mysterious. But where'd that notebook come from?" Pride replaced Lynn's reticence. He grinned. "Headmaster Dumbledore gave me Nicholas Flamel's notebook." He planted himself at his desk and impatiently flipped it open. The first lines he read made him freeze for a moment. In 1347, Pope Pelagius IV secretly kept a krupp that could recite the Bible. He was convinced it was an incarnation of an angel, until that dog stole his roast chicken during a meeting of the College of Cardinals. Lynn skimmed further. "Played cards with Countess Bathory. She cheated, using a scrying charm to peek at my hands. I had to turn her mithril hairpin into a biting little snake in the next round. The scene was awkward for a while. Discussed flying machine sketches with Da Vinci. He insisted an ornithopter should be made of ash because it was light and poetic. I quietly added a pinch of Peruvian light metal powder. He was like a child after the successful test flight and never learned the truth. Witnessed the debut of a certain famous soprano. Her high notes shattered 3 crystal chandeliers. Later discovered she had been placed under a sonorous curse by a jealous rival. The effect lasted 20 years. Lynn went very still, the grin slipping from his face as he absorbed the lively, impossible little anecdotes scrawled in the margins of Nicholas Flamel's old notebook. 170. Excruciating pain and bone-scraping agony. Bang, bang, bang! A series of dull thuds and exasperated shouts erupted from the Hufflepuff common room. "What the hell is this, you?" Lynn squeezed a string of censored expletives through his teeth and slammed his fist down on the desk. The quill jumped and the ink bottle wobbled 3 times. Edgar, William, and Ollie immediately put down what they were doing and clustered around, curious. What could Headmaster Dumbledore possibly have given Lynn to make him so furious? They looked at the open notebook on the table and blinked at the titles inside. Anecdotes of a certain Pope's familiar. Cheated while playing cards with a vampire countess. Secretly enhancing a muggle genius inventor. And a dozen other century-spanning pieces of wizarding gossip. Edgar scratched his head, glanced from the notebook to Lynn's sullen expression, and asked hesitantly, Headmaster Dumbledore's reward is unique. Does he collect gossip now?" Lynn rolled his eyes. He wanted to take back his promise. If he had known Dumbledore's present would be nothing but secrets and scandal, the weekend's clamor outside the castle was louder than usual. The annual Quidditch season had kicked off, and the first match was Gryffindor versus Hufflepuff. Yellow and red flags crisscrossed the stands, the crowd's cheers drifting even through the thick castle walls. But the weather was miserable. The sky looked like spilled ink, heavy with dark clouds, and a damp, cold wind hinted at a coming downpour. Lynn stood by the common room window and peered out, then watched Edgar nervously test his beater's gloves and mutter tactics under his breath. Without hesitation, he made his decision. "I'm going fishing in the Black Lake," he announced. "What?" Edgar looked up in disbelief. "Today's my match, against Gryffindor. You're going fishing? The weather's bad. The fish might be more active," Lynn said, already packing his gear. "Besides, I can't do much from the sidelines. Good luck. I'll be rooting for you." He gave Edgar a firm pat on the shoulder and left. Back at the lake, Lynn set up on the shore. He transfigured a transparent, rain-proof shelter, folded out a small chair, and cast his line into the increasingly choppy water. He reeled and cast intermittently, eyes unfocused, thoughts drifting as the sky darkened and clouds rolled lower. Minute after minute passed under the hush before the storm, only the soft splashing of the lake and the distant murmur of the castle. Then, boom, A deafening thunderclap tore through the air. A tall fir nearby split at the base and crashed down, smoke rising from the fracture and blocking part of the path. Amid the roar of falling timber and flying wood chips, a scrawny black dog streaked past with astonishing agility, leaping just wide of the collapsing trunk and the erratic bolts of electricity that spattered the air. Lynn, in pursuit, swung his wand. A blue-white serpentine bolt of electricity shot forward, grazing the dog's tail and slamming into the spot the animal had occupied a heartbeat before, scorching the earth and opening a blackened pit. The dog twisted and dodged the attack, and in that instant its form lengthened and contorted. In the blink of an eye, the animal vanished and was replaced by a tall, gaunt man in ragged clothes, hair matted and wild. He still clutched a wand, rain washing the grime from his face, a crooked grin pulling at his lips as he laughed in short, manic bursts. "Ha ha! A little brat, come to claim a ministry bounty? Ha!" the man cackled. Lynn stopped about 10 meters away, rain dripping from the thin, transfigured shield above him. He narrowed his eyes at the laughing figure, face calm despite the harsh laughter. He raised his wand and aimed. "What are you laughing at?" he asked. Before the man could answer, a crimson light flared from the tip of Lynn's wand. "Cruciatus," he intoned. A blinding scarlet beam tore through the rain and struck Sirius Black squarely in the chest. His frenzied laughter cut off in an instant. He hadn't expected this young wizard to use such a vicious, unforgivable curse so quickly. His limbs stiffened unnaturally. The curse hit, and the man screamed, collapsing into the mud and convulsing violently. Lynn watched the twitching figure and waited quietly, expecting the system to notify him that the mission was complete. Not enough force? The expected system prompt still didn't appear. The silence stretched on. Lynn scratched his head, a crease of doubt forming between his brows. Could it be he wasn't being hard enough? He looked down at Black, who was writhing in the mud and staring blankly, but clearly not meeting whatever invisible standard marked someone as punished. Lynn felt a pang of uncertainty. Maybe he'd been too gentle. "Cruciatus," he snapped. A second, searing crimson beam shot from the tip of his wand. Black went rigid, as if some distant image of James Potter were waving at him through a rain curtain. He tried to speak, to scream, but the grinding agony that clawed at his soul strangled any sound. Lynn waited, patient. The system remained mute. Puzzlement turned to irritation. He sheathed his wand, crouched, and examined the man on the ground more closely. Could he have punished the wrong person? Impossible. Sirius Black was a ministry-certified criminal. The papers had called him monstrous. Then again, considering how the ministry's bureaucracy could twist murders into accidents, nothing was truly impossible. Lynn gave Black a light kick. "Hey, let me ask you something. Did you betray Joan Thorne?" Black's consciousness was fraying, split by the aftereffects of 2 cruciatus curses. He had no strength to parse the question, let alone answer. Lynn's lip curled. He drew his wand again and fixed it on Black's forehead. "Legilimency," he said. He forced open Black's mental gates and began flipping through memories. Images, sounds, and raw emotions flooded his mind in a violent rush. The young, arrogant marauders, Snape hung upside down from a tree, humiliated, secret Order of the Phoenix meetings, the Potter's cozy cottage and Baby Harry's bright laugh, the terrible turn of events before Halloween, changing the secret keeper, and a small, rat-like figure, Peter Pettigrew. The fragments sped by, then coalesced into a clear picture. Lynn fell silent. It was the wrong man. The real betrayer was a rat. Black had been framed. For a moment, conviction wavered, but then Lynn remembered why he'd come here in the first place. Who said he was doing this to avenge Ollie? He was settling a score on behalf of Professor Snape's childhood. That made it righteous. Besides, wasn't this a textbook case of school bullying? He was just righting a wrong. The faint twinge of guilt dissolved. He looked at Black, broken, unconscious, and sighed. It wouldn't do to set him on fire if he was innocent. He raised his wand again. The light softened. Obliviate. A silver-white light washed Black's head as Lynn carefully altered and erased memories. The moments of him casting Cruciatus were replaced with a more plausible memory. He'd merely stunned Black with Stupefy in the attempt to subdue a fugitive. Everything that followed was wiped clean. When he finished, Lynn stepped back and aimed his wand toward the sky above the forbidden forest. He cast an explosion charm far stronger than usual. The blast roared overhead, a brief bloom of fire visible through the rain. The shockwave whipped the branches, shaking the trees and filling the night with a thunderous noise. That kind of disturbance would draw attention. This was one of the principal's people. Far away at the Quidditch pitch, Dumbledore, who had just used his Patronus to scatter a cluster of Dementors, stiffened. He gave a quick word to Professor McGonagall and vanished from the stands with a faint crack of apparition. In the next instant, he appeared on the empty ground not far from Lynn. Dumbledore's worried look shifted into a complex expression when he saw Lynn. "Child," he said through the rain, his voice heavy with exasperation, "which werewolf did you burn this time?" Lynn's mouth twitched. For a moment he didn't know how to answer. He spread his hands. "No, Principal. Stereotypes are bad. It's really not a werewolf this time." He pointed to the unconscious Black. "I seem to have accidentally picked up a fugitive." Dumbledore finally turned to study the man on the ground. You did well, child." Hogwarts dungeon, later. Dumbledore stood to one side, watching the man bound to a stone chair by shimmering magical chains, Sirius Black. Snape stood over him with no ceremony. He pried open Black's jaw and poured a large bottle of reviving potion down his throat. Black coughed violently, but the potion worked. He blinked and looked up at Dumbledore. "Dumbledore, Peter, it's Peter," he snarled, struggling until the chains clanked. "That traitor, that sewer rat, he's the one who killed James and Lily. He did it. I'm going to—" His shouting bounced off the stone, frantic and raw. Dumbledore's face revealed little. He watched Black with a calm, searching look. "Where is the evidence, Sirius?" he asked. Not a dismissal, but a demand for something concrete. An accusation from a desperate fugitive meant nothing without proof. Black's face twisted. "Evidence? He's an animagus. Like us. Me, James, that bitch. We did it so Remus wouldn't be alone. His animal form is a rat. He's hiding with the Weasleys. He's been in that red-haired boy's pocket all along. I saw it, in the photograph in the Daily Prophet." The rant was ragged, but the crucial claim was clear. Peter Pettigrew was alive, an animagus rat, and hiding with Ron Weasley. Snape needed no further orders. He spun on his heel and kicked the dungeon door open, fury written in every movement. At the Gryffindor dormitory, an old rat paced anxiously in a soft-lined cage. Its beady eyes flicked to empty spaces, its muscles tense with instinctive unease. The feeling today was sharper than usual. Carefully, it used its claws to work the latch, slipped out, and listened at the door. No sound. It darted across Ron's cluttered bedside table and found Ron's wand, forgotten, half hung over the edge. The rat seized it in its teeth and squeezed out beneath the dormitory door. It followed the familiar route through the castle, heart-pounding. As luck, or bad luck, would have it, it was scurrying down a corridor toward the lower levels when a noisy crowd came around the corner, returning from the Quidditch pitch. Ron led them, bewildered, with McGonagall frowning at his side and Snape glowering behind them. "Scabbers!" Ron cried when he spotted the gray rat pressed to the wall, the wand clenched in its jaws. His eyes went wide. "What are you doing with my wand?" Snape's wand flashed. A jet of light shot toward the rat. Squeak! Peter's reflexes were honed by years of hiding. He lunged, the spell skittered off his tail, and sparks showered onto the stone. The corridor erupted. Students screamed and stamped, trying to avoid the magic and the rat. "A rat! It's by my feet!" Chaos swelled. "Don't move!" Professor McGonagall barked, trying to restore order. Snape's face was white with fury, wand trained at the mass of students, but no clean shot presented itself. Peter used the confusion to his advantage, darting under skirts and between legs, slipping through gaps as students stumbled. He saw a narrow opening as someone sidestepped and hurled himself through it, vanishing around the corner. "He's getting away!" someone shouted. Snape and McGonagall sprang after him without hesitation. 172. I hate mice. The rat bolted through Hogwarts' labyrinthine corridors, its 4 tiny paws moving so fast they almost left after images. It darted and swiveled, slipping into side passages, skimming the shadows at the base of the walls, and using tapestries, suits of armor, or the swaying hems of students' robes as brief cover as it fled. More than anything, it was its knowledge of the castle's layout that kept it alive. "Ah, it's coming this way again. Left, left. Merlin, it's running so fast." Shouts and stamping feet echoed from every direction, but the chaos worked in the rat's favor. It weaved through legs and panicked faces. Professor McGonagall and Professor Snape gave chase without hesitation. McGonagall's face was a grim line. She could always anticipate the little creature's path, but she dared not cast wide-reaching spells in the crowded corridor for fear of hurting students. Snape's wand tip glittered constantly. A few of his spells caught the stonework, gouging shallow pits in floors and walls and making nearby students duck and cry out. At last, the rat spotted an opening and raced down a flight of stairs, through the entrance hall, and toward the open castle gates. Peter Pettigrew thought that once he reached open ground, his size and speed would give him a chance to disappear. McGonagall and Snape surged through the gates after him and out into the pounding rain. McGonagall's thought, how dangerous it would be to cast powerful crowd control spells inside, died mid-sentence when she saw that the archway was not empty. 4 students stood by the gate, apparently about to return to the castle. One of them, a black-haired Hufflepuff, was gesturing and talking intently to his companions. Peter, panicked, only saw bodies and assumed he could lose his pursuers in the crowd. He bolted toward the group. Just as the rat darted beneath their feet, 2 of the students, Ollie and Lynn, lifted their wands at the same time. "Confringo!" they shouted. 2 blinding white flashes erupted with a deafening boom. The shock wave and flying debris hit the tiny gray creature like an invisible hammer. "Squeak!" The rat screamed and was flung through the air, tracing a short arc before slamming onto the stone road several meters away. It rolled twice and lay still. Then Lynn fired another spell to make certain. The little body was ruined. Gray fur blasted away to reveal bloody flesh. One hind leg twisted at a grotesque angle, blood seeping from nose and mouth. It twitched weakly. It wasn't going to survive. The whole scene had unfolded in an instant. McGonagall and Snape, who had just reached the steps, froze. McGonagall gasped. Snape's brow tightened as he stared at the dying creature, then at the 2 boys. Ollie's hand trembled around his wand. He stood very still, chest heaving, the shock still raw. He looked up at the professors and, pale and awkward, managed in a dry voice, "Sorry, Professor. I hate rats." Lynn gave a sheepish laugh. Professor, I hate rats too." It was an unarguable motive. For a moment, the 4 of them stood in stunned silence. Then a clear, mechanical chime sounded inside Lynn's head. "Task completed. Rewards have been issued. Please learn animagus on your own." Lynn blinked. He'd been telling Ollie and the others that he'd accidentally discovered the true culprit who had betrayed Ollie's mother might still be alive, hiding at Ron's place disguised as a rat. He'd even joked about buying it from Ron. Then, impossibly, the very target he'd been talking about came running straight to him. Luck, when it came, was abrupt and overwhelming. McGonagall stepped forward, wand out, and a soft, steady light wrapped around the rat. She quickly staunched the worst of the bleeding, and then applied a few binding and anti-curse spells to make certain the creature couldn't lash out if any residual strength remained. Finally, she blurred its outline, as if to make the scene harder to see, so the other students wouldn't panic. "Everything's fine here," she told the 4. "Return to the castle. It's cold after the rain. Don't stand here." She said no more and hurried back in. Snape snorted coldly, said nothing, and followed her inside. A few days later, ministry officials arrived at Hogwarts. Cornelius Fudge came with a party of stern-faced aurors and hauled Peter Pettigrew from the infirmary where Professor McGonagall and Madame Pomfrey had been tending him. Peter was alive only by the most desperate measures, given the most potent healing potions and life-sustaining charms, and he clung to life by a thread. He lay swaddled in thick bandages, his face ashen, eyes dull, emitting occasional unconscious groans. If he survived, a Wizengamot trial and a likely life sentence in Azkaban awaited. The Aurors shouldered Peter's stretcher like it was refuse and carried him onto a ministry carriage. Snape watched from behind a high window in the castle and let out a long, private sigh of relief. He wouldn't have to brew those damned draughts for his enemy every morning anymore. For days, to keep Peter alive as a key witness and to coax confessions from him, Snape had controlled all of the man's potions. Invigoration draughts, Skelegro, blood-replenishing tonics. Every bottle came from him. It was a kind of mental torture. He fought the urge to adulterate the draughts and instead followed the recipes precisely. Still, something odd had started to happen. No matter how perfectly he brewed them or how beneficial their effects should have been, each potion first seemed to stabilize Peter's wounds. Then, inexplicably, healthy patches of skin elsewhere on his body would begin to swell and ulcerate, symptoms quite unlike the blast wound to his chest. Care to learn about the poisonous immortal curse? 173. Animagus time quietly slid into December. Hogwarts was dusted with an early delicate snow. Frost traced the castle windows, and the corridors teemed with students whose cheeks and ears glowed as if they'd just left Madame Pomfrey's. The latest issue of the Daily Prophet had been delivered by Owl and instantly set the school abuzz far more than the weather. "Did you see today's front page?" A Gryffindor waved his paper like a flag. "What is it this time? Another puff piece about Minister Fudge?" his friend scoffed. "No, the ministry has officially withdrawn all the wanted posters for Sirius Black and publicly declared him innocent. The real murderer was Peter Pettigrew. He's the one who blew up a Muggle street and killed a bunch of people." "For real?" "Absolutely. They printed a summary of the Wizengamot hearing and some of the evidence. And have you noticed? The Dementors outside the school were withdrawn this morning." "Merlin, this is my second aunt's sister-in-law's neighbor's brother-in-law works as a clerk in the Department of Magical Law Enforcement. He says Barty Crouch and Fudge had a massive row in the minister's office. Apparently, Crouch was so furious he nearly singed Fudge's dragonhide briefcase. There's another bit about a spike in vampire attacks, and the ministry's advising everyone to be careful," another voice supplied. Truth and overdue justice dominated the common rooms and the Great Hall. Some sighed for Black, others spat at Peter Pettigrew's name. But none of it concerned Lynn right then. He was deep in the Forbidden Forest, staring at a small patch of unusually dense weeds he had planted. The leaves were thick, the edges a stubborn dark green despite the winter, and the centers gathered heavy, lustrous beads of dew. Using transfiguration and alchemical techniques, Lynn had fashioned a transparent cover to form a tiny greenhouse over the patch. Inside, vapor misted the air. Above the cover sat a delicately constructed furnace, in which burned a cluster of Gubrathian fire. The magical flame provided a gentle, steady warmth, enough to raise the temperature under the cover without harming the plants. Heat evaporated the night dew from the leaves. The vapor condensed on the cold inner walls, coalesced into larger droplets, and ran down preset grooves into a crystal vial below. Drip, drip. Lynn sat cross-legged, watching the dew slowly fill the vial, feeling pleased. Ever since the full moon last month, he had kept that damned single mandrake leaf stuck to the roof of his mouth. It was like a mouthful of dry powdered soy, stuck, irritating, impossible to spit out or swallow, reminding him of itself every second. It didn't just madden his taste buds, it made speaking awkward. On top of that, to keep the ritual right, he'd had to chant Amato, Animo, Animato Animagus every sunrise, facing the sun. Finally, if tonight's full moon went as planned, he could take the torturous leaf out of his mouth and put it into the crystal bottle of moonlight. That would mean the preparatory phase of becoming an animagus would be mostly complete. Night fell. A nearly perfect silver disk of a full moon rose. Its cold, clear light sank through bare boughs and flung silver shards across the forest floor. Lynn slung his pack over his shoulder and headed toward the unicorn habitat deeper in the woods. From a distance, he cleared his throat and called out, "Anya, I've come to see you all." His voice rolled through the quiet trees. Clippity-clop, clippity-clop, the sound of hooves answered him as a herd of unicorns burst from the undergrowth. Some had tufts of mane or shed tail hair in their mouths. Others held small buckets carefully between their teeth. Lynn peered at the thick liquid sloshing in those buckets and blurted, "Acromantula venom." He looked at Anya with wide, delighted eyes. "How did you get this? They didn't have so much last time I came." "Heh, centaurs helped gather it. They've been clearing out excess spiders at the edge of their territory lately. Don't worry about the details. Hurry up, time for the trade. Give us the wine." Lynn was momentarily speechless. Those acromantulas had lied to him before, saying they were out of stock. Had he not done enough for them? He'd helped manage their population, taught them to prepare the food they produced, even showed them a bit of economics. He felt he'd given a great deal for that spider colony and had quietly started planning how to harvest them sustainably, but that would come later. For now, he hauled several large wooden barrels from his pack, filled with berry nectar wine brewed from honey, spring water, and berries unique to the Forbidden Forest. The unicorns clustered around, sniffed, and inspected, and the exchange was over quickly amid their eager satisfaction. Anya took a large, contented gulp and then led Lynn to a moonlit clearing in their territory. This was the place. Lynn withdrew the crystal bottle he had prepared, the vial of moonlight, and, under the full moon's direct glow, carefully placed a strand of his hair, a teaspoon of the dew he'd collected, a slightly twitching death's head hawkmoth chrysalis, and finally, the single mandrake leaf he'd been keeping in his mouth into the crystal bottle. The liquid inside shimmered, boiled gently, emitted a soft glow, then stilled until it looked like liquid moonlight. Lynn dug a shallow hole, set the bottle upright in the earth, covered it, and left only a faint, inconspicuous mark on the surface. "Done," he said softly. Now he only had to wait for a thunderstorm to finish the final step of the animagus transformation. He was in an excellent mood. After saying goodbye to the unicorn herd, who were showing signs of pleasant tipsiness, he set off in another direction, toward the acromantula nesting grounds. Before he neared the darker zone that smelled of silk and old hunger, Lynn stopped and shouted loud enough to wake hibernating things. "My eight-legged friends inside, come out and hand over your stock. Don't hide. I know you have private stashes of good stuff. Last time's cleaning fee still hasn't been settled." His voice echoed through the silent woods with a tone of righteous indignation, though whether it was entirely justified was another matter. For a long moment, there was only silence. Then, from deep within the trees, a scalp-tingling rustle and a few terrified high-pitched screeches answered. "Don't you come over here!" Crackle, snap, bang, bang, Avada Kedavra! A series of heart-pounding sounds echoed through the depths of the Forbidden Forest, punctuated by the crisp snapping of branches and dull thuds. After a kind and friendly conversation, the acromantulas had apparently come to understand the benefits of cooperation. Lynn's enchanted satchel opened, and two enormous, unexpectedly capacious barrels floated out and settled unsteadily in the clearing. Come on, don't shove. Line up, be civilized, show some manners." Lynn waved his wand like a traffic controller. "This side, your team is responsible for spinning silk. It needs to be pure and lustrous, no impurities. Over there, your team provides the venom, high concentration, freshly harvested." The acromantulas, now acquainted with the so-called logic, looked at each other, their compound eyes flickering with resignation. Those two barrels were huge, big enough to hold the nest's entire stock, and it was obvious what would be required to fill them. They wouldn't drop dead if they emptied themselves, but they certainly wouldn't be feeling well afterward. Lynn patted the sides of the barrels, producing a dull thunk, and urged them in an overly cheerful tone. "Hey, don't just stand there. Get moving, friends. The sooner you finish, the sooner you're free to go home and rest. I'm in a hurry." Under that logic, the spiders finally resigned themselves and began to work. They awkwardly split into two rows. One stretched their abdomens and secreted silk into the first barrel. The other squeezed out precious venom into the second. Lynn stood with his arms folded, supervising. Watching the barrels slowly but steadily fill put him in an even better mood than completing the animagus preparations. He'd have plenty of materials to squander on experiments, stronger enchanted fabrics, better bowstrings, novel toxins, maybe even something new by combining spider silk and venom. He was mentally cataloging future projects when a sudden chill skittered down his spine like a needle. He looked around, his wand slid into his palm. Out of the corner of his eye, a dark red shadow streaked over the treetops at blinding speed, leaving a faint afterimage as it bore straight for the clearing. Its shape was blurred, its motion otherworldly, silent in its flight. He was about to get a better look. A single drop of thick, rust-scented blood shot through the air like a bolt from a heavy crossbow, aimed straight at Lynn's face. Its speed far exceeded that of an ordinary spell. "Holy, what is that?" Lynn swore. Relying on his reflexes, he jerked his head aside at the last possible moment. The drop hissed past his ear. It struck one of the spiders that had been too busy to react, hitting the back of its carapace. A sizzling sound erupted, like acid eating metal or flesh being drained, and the blood seemed to melt into the shell as if it were alive. The spider convulsed, legs flailing. A fist-sized, dark red orb condensed above its body, rolling and expanding. Its once full form withered and shriveled in seconds, collapsing into a dried husk. The whole sequence, from the blood's arrival to the spider's death, took only a breath or two. The other acromantulas panicked, scattering back into the nest and abandoning their work. Lynn's expression hardened. He didn't hesitate. He lifted his wand. Confringo, a violent spell blasted from his wand, detonating the area he had targeted. The explosion shook the trees, flames leapt skyward, and a shockwave whipped leaves and gravel into the air. Several trees struck directly by the blast cracked and burned. When the smoke and dust cleared, Lynn narrowed his eyes. Near the blast's center, a translucent shield of viscous, dark red blood hung steady, its surface bubbling and rolling like a boiling pool, absorbing most of the explosion's force and heat. Though dimmed and scarred at the edges, it had stopped his blast. Behind that shield, a figure took shape, a tall, gaunt man in dark red robes. His skin was a sickly gray-white, his black hair was combed meticulously, his face was deathly pale, and his slightly elongated canines flashed coldly. Most unsettling were his eyes, glowing a deep, hungry red. Lynn let out a faint, surprised sound and raised an eyebrow. "A vampire," he said under his breath. No wonder the attack was so fast and so strange. The vampire didn't answer, his gaze fixed on Lynn, filled with ravenous intent. He slowly lifted a near-transparent hand, splaying his fingers. A metallic sound rang out, like blades being drawn. His fingernails elongated in an instant into 5 razor-like talons, each at least half a foot long, edges shimmering with a dark red light. He lunged, a trail of afterimages following his motion, the 5 blades whistling toward Lynn's throat. "He's going for close combat?" Lynn's eyes sharpened. Instead of stepping back, he moved forward half a pace and flicked his wand. "Erumpent charge!" The air in front of Lynn shuddered. A phantom of a massive erumpent materialized. Bulging muscles, curved horns, rock-like hide, and charged with the force of a battering ram. Though slightly translucent, it struck as if it were solid. The collision was brutal. The vampire's razor-tipped nails were no match for the impact force. They shattered like thin ice, dark red shards scattering in all directions. The phantom drove the vampire full into an ancient tree. The tree groaned under the impact, bark exploding and wood chips flying. The vampire was half embedded in the trunk, his crimson robes torn and bloodied. The erumpent vision slowly dissipated into mist. Lynn watched as the vampire slid down the tree, half kneeling, clutching his chest and gasping. A cold sneer touched Lynn's mouth. "It seems your nails were well maintained, but they lack hardness," he said, flexing his wrist and raising his wand again. "Now it's my turn. Tell me, who sent you to Hogwarts?" The vampire raised its head, eyes fixed on Lynn with a cold, dead stare. At the indentation in its chest where the horned beast's impact had struck, a faint squirming could be heard. Dark red bloodlight flowed through the wound, and flesh knit itself back together with a speed visible to the naked eye. In an instant, the injury that would have crippled an ordinary person was mostly healed, leaving only a shredded robe and a few smeared stains. The cost, however, was obvious. Its pale face went even whiter, the blue-black tracery of veins beneath its skin standing out like ink. It opened its mouth and released a sharp, inhuman screech. Dark red ripples radiated outward from it like rings across water. Wherever they passed, fallen leaves were pulverized and hairline cracks skittered across tree trunks. This was no simple magical concussive blast. It was a layered assault that could shatter eardrums, cloud minds, and even make blood reverse and boil. Lynn had anticipated something like this the moment it raised its head. He tapped his 12 near his ear, and an invisible barrier snapped into place, isolating his hearing from the sonic core. The remaining ripples were held at bay by his shield charm, but even so, a pressure tightened his chest and his pulse sped. Without a moment's hesitation, while the aftershocks of the screech still roiled through the clearing, Lynn leveled his 12. A column of green light split the air. Avada Kedavra! The bolt struck the vampire's chest dead center. The instant death he expected did not come. The vampire's body shuddered violently. An eerie green sheen flickered across its skin and then dimmed. Rather than succumbing, it simply grew sluggish. A low chuckle rumbled from its throat before it thrust its hands forward. This time it was not a few scattered spurts of blood. Thick crimson seeped from its palms and even beneath the skin along its arms. The blood did not drip, it coalesced, swelling in the air into a hideous pillar that lunged toward Lynn, reeking with a foul metallic stench. Alarm bells rang in Lynn's mind. Nothing in the library had described a vampire using such a long-range articulated attack. Traditional vampires relied on speed, strength, fangs, claws, or simple mind-clouding or blood manipulation talents. Half-bloods, who used 12S, fought more like wizards. This creature fought in a strange, unfamiliar manner. He would not be overconfident. He flicked his 12 and shouted, "Torrential impact!" An intense, azure jet of water erupted from the wand, colliding head-on with the oncoming pillar of blood. The two forces met with a thunderous roar, water and blood shredding each other, steam and spray hissing and spraying. For a tense moment they stalemated, the blood trying to corrode through the torrent, while the water washed and diluted it. Seizing the pause, Lynn spread the fingers of his free left hand and made a grasping motion. Hand of thunder summoning! The air crackled. The patch of night above the clearing darkened further, threads of electricity dancing in the clouds. A concentrated bolt of lightning struck down out of nowhere, hammering the vampire's head as it concentrated on sustaining the blood pillar. Thunder rolled. The vampire's skull was engulfed in blinding blue-white light, blue smoke hissing from the wound. It convulsed. Its concentration faltered. When the smoke cleared, the top of its head had been scorched open. What trickled from the wound was not ordinary blood, but a thick, blackened ichor that spattered and sizzled corrosively where it hit the ground. The creature's aura withered perceptibly. Lynn pushed his advantage. The water pillar began to surge forward, gaining ground. At that precise moment, a muffled, mechanical hum sounded from somewhere inside the vampire, like a precision instrument straining. Its red eyes flashed a sharper, more artificial light. Beep, beep. Then, with a deafening boom, its body erupted. It did not shred into gore. Instead, the vampire seemed to turn inside out, dissolving into a churn of thick blood mist that contracted into a narrow stream and shot away, not toward Lynn, but fleeing deeper into the forbidden forest, moving with a speed it had not shown before. "Trying to run," Lynn barked. The thing had seen him use an unforgivable curse. He could not let it escape. He snapped his wrist and traced a trajectory with his 12. Orb of water. The collapsing water pillar reformed in an instant, countless threads and jets twisting into a massive, deep blue sphere that closed ahead of the bloodstream's path. The fleeing mist slammed against the inner walls of the aqueous prison, hissing and sputtering as each impact washed and diluted it. Water is both soft and inexorable. The blood mist could not break it. With every contact, it lost volume and momentum, its shape weakening until it could no longer sustain itself. Within breaths, the mist contracted into a body again. The vampire reconstituted at the center of the water globe, its form staring out through the undulating wall with hollow, unlit eyes. Black blood stained its lips. After a long, ragged pause, the creature spoke, voice thin as wind through bone. "Kid, I remember you. You're sent. You're 10. It faltered, drawing on what little strength remained. "I will definitely find you." The words barely finished when the last spark in its eyes went out. The life that had held the condensed form together drained away. The body did not collapse so much as wither. Flesh shrank to skin tight against bone, muscles desiccated into cords. In less than 5 seconds, the tall, threatening form became a shriveled, brittle husk. Lynn frowned and waved his 12, dissipating the water prison. The sphere collapsed in a splash, and the lightweight, empty shell fell with it, hitting the forest floor with a dull thud. 176. Shameless Lynn didn't rush in. He cast several detection spells, checking the empty shell over and over for signs of life, magical fluctuations, or curse traps. Once he was satisfied, there were no such traces. The blood shield that had blocked the explosion charm, the pillar of blood that had attacked, and the creature's ability to turn to mist had all clearly burned themselves out. He stepped up to the shell and, using his wand, gently folded back the tattered robes to take a closer look. What he saw stopped him cold. The outer skin looked like desiccated flesh, but its texture was that of a complex, processed composite. Under the surface, especially across the chest and nape, faint, regular patterns ran like circuits. Lynn traced one of the lines with a finger and swore under his breath. This wasn't a living vampire at all. This was alchemy. Back in his trunk, he found a large dragon hide bag. He eased the shriveled shell into it, tied the mouth shut, and tucked the bag away. It was valuable. He'd take it back for study. He also collected samples of acromantula venom and silk, sealed them, and left the forbidden forest. The next morning, after a hurried breakfast, Lynn refused his roommate's invitation to play in the common room and went straight back to his dormitory. He pulled the dragon hide bag from his trunk and laid its contents on his workbench. Several detection instruments blinked with different lights around the shell. Wearing dragon hide gloves and using precision tools, Lynn had been at it for a while. He had carefully disassembled the shell along the joints and patterned seams he'd found, exposing its internal construction. They really went all out, and they're disgusting about it, he muttered, lifting a mesh-like structure embedded along the spine. The internal build confirmed his suspicion. This was an alchemical puppet, not a real vampire. At its center sat a deep red, multifaceted core engraved with dense ancient runes that formed an extremely complex rune array. From his careful dismantling, Lynn concluded the core's main function was to receive remote instructions and drive the carrier's movements. It could transmit the carrier's sensory information back to a receiver in real time, basically a live feed. That meant whoever controlled it could see through the carrier's eyes without feeling any pain when the body was damaged. Beside the core lay an alchemical circulatory lattice, tangled silver metal conduits like a network of veins with a jewel-like unit set at its center. The lattice connected to the patterned lines across the shell's body and appeared designed to convert blood into the power that animated the puppet. The skin itself was a real physical body, but one altered by alchemy. Lynn couldn't help picturing some poor person's remains dug up and twisted into this mockery. One crucial question nagged at him. What exactly was the blood that drove this thing? From last night's fight, the dark red fluid had been the puppet's main offensive medium and energy source. Lynn tried to inject ordinary blood. He used a sample from a dark wizard long dead into the puppet's vascular lattice. Nothing happened. The blood pooled in the pipes, and the carrier remained inert. Not just any blood will do, he said, rubbing his chin. Is it that these vampire carriers don't drink normal human blood? Or was that blood something they injected during manufacture, a disposable fuel? The mystery remained unsolved. Another day passed. That morning, Lynn put the vampire problem aside and headed to Defense Against the Dark Arts with his 3 roommates, Edgar, William, and Ollie, chatting as usual. They took their seats and waited for the professor. The bell rang on time. The classroom door was pushed open and a black-cloaked figure strode in, bringing a chill with him. The room went silent. You could hear a pin drop. "What's going on, Professor Snape?" a Ravenclaw girl whispered to her friend. "Didn't Lupin only take 2 days off? He subbed the day before yesterday, so why again today?" A Hufflepuff boy muttered that he'd heard Lupin was already better. Snape's eyes swept slowly across the room, the corners of his mouth curving into a mocking smile. "Silence," he said. The words were soft, but they cut off every whisper. "In my class, I do not wish to hear any foolish conversation unrelated to the lesson." He paused, fixing his gaze on the students who had spoken. Hufflepuff and Ravenclaw, 10 points each. Reason: failure to remain quiet after the bell rang, a lack of basic respect for a professor. A collective inward groan rippled through the students. Snape ignored it, picked up the chalk, and wrote the lesson on the board. "Open your textbooks to Chapter 5 of the Dark Forces, A Guide to Self-Protection. Today, we will examine, in depth, a dangerous and vile creature." The class felt suffocating under Snape's presence. When the final bell rang, it felt like salvation. The instant Snape dismissed them, the students grabbed their things and spilled out of the room as if fleeing. The corridor erupted with gossip. "What's going on with Lupin? Please, not Snape subbing all term. I thought I saw Lupin this morning. Madame Pomfrey told him to rest more last night, didn't she?" Rumors flew until a few better-informed students arrived with a report that finally seemed to stick. Professor Lupin is right. 177. It was no coincidence. Professor Lupin is in the school infirmary, and Madame Pomfrey has strictly forbidden anyone from visiting. At the news, the students fell silent, faces going pale with worry. Everyone was concerned, but Madame Pomfrey's orders at Hogwarts were only second to the headmaster's and Professor McGonagall's. There was nothing to do but swallow their fears and murmur, "I hope he gets better soon." Lynn stayed where he was, brow furrowed. Lupin in the Shrieking Shack? That didn't make sense. He remembered the Shrieking Shack clearly. Dumbledore had set up strict protective wards there. If an anomaly had been triggered, the headmaster should have known immediately and rushed to the scene. Under Dumbledore's watch, how could Lupin be hurt badly enough to be in the infirmary and barred from visitors? Something was wrong. Had he been attacked? Should I go see? Thought turned to action. Lynn glanced at Edgar and the others, who were headed toward their next History of Magic class. Ouch, I suddenly don't feel well, like I've come down with something, feverish and all. Edgar, you guys go to class first. I need to go to the infirmary. Ask Professor Binns for me. Just say I'm unwell. Before they could reply, Lynn clutched his forehead and hurried off toward the infirmary. Edgar, William, and Ollie watched his back as he moved, head bowed, but steps brisk. That performance of his, William pushed up his glasses and muttered, is worse than Lockhart's. Look at his cheeks, rosy as a Lumos charm, and his eyes are bright enough to light a room, Edgar sneered. Now he claims he's feverish. Who's he trying to fool? If Madame Pomfrey falls for that, I'll eat my hat. Ollie said nothing, just nodded repeatedly. Lynn jogged the rest of the way to the infirmary and paused at the door to steady his breath and adjust his expression. He fumbled in his pocket and pulled out half of a suspiciously colored candy that smelled faintly of mint and chili, the prototype Skiving snack box, fever version, the twins had given him. Hope the side effects aren't ridiculous, he muttered, popping it into his mouth. The candy melted quickly. A warm, tingling current raced from his throat to the top of his head. The effect was immediate. His cheeks flushed a deep, unnatural red and sweat beaded on his forehead. The whites of his eyes became bloodshot and the sockets reddened, making his eyes look raw and sore. His lips went dry and flaky. Hiss! Strong stuff, Lynn breathed. His voice took on a nasal, congested tone as his throat scratched. The prototype simulated fever perfectly, even a dull heaviness in his limbs. It was unpleasant, but convincing enough. Ready, Lynn pushed open the infirmary door and stepped inside. Madame Pomfrey, are you here? I don't feel well. I think I have a fever. The infirmary was unusually quiet. Sunlight lay across the clean floor, but no sound came from the dispensing room, and Madame Pomfrey did not appear at the desk as she usually would. Lynn blinked his bloodshot eyes and called again, raising his voice a little. Madame Pomfrey? My head really hurts. Still nothing. A few seconds later, he stepped further in, scanning the ward. Several beds were made and empty. Professor Lupin wasn't in sight. Damn! Lynn's expression fell. I pretended for nothing. No one's here. Who am I performing for? He stuffed the other half of the candy in his mouth, the antidote prototype the twins claimed would work. A cool punch chased away the feverish heat, and the heaviness ebbed. Apart from a lingering odd taste, the fever evaporated like a bad dream. Lynn's eyes roved the room. Nothing looked unusual. The dispensing room door was shut, but that wasn't strange. Then his gaze landed on a sheet of parchment open on Madame Pomfrey's desk. The title was unmistakable: Emergency Treatment Protocol for Hypovolemic Shock and Organ Failure in Werewolves, Individual Case. Werewolf blood loss? Organ failure? Lynn's pulse quickened. He looked toward the back of the infirmary, where a series of heavy doors led to isolation rooms and special exam areas. As he passed one particularly thick door, muffled voices drifted out. One belonged to Madame Pomfrey. She sounded grave and even a little bewildered. Are you certain it was a vampire attack? This wound, this residue, doesn't match the signatures of any known vampire clan. It doesn't even look like conventional dark arts. A quiet, hoarse reply came from the other side. It was Lupin. I'm certain, Poppy, that the vampire used a strange blood droplet and hit me. Lupin's breathing grew heavier. If Dumbledore hadn't arrived in time, I probably would have been. The rest was blurred. as though Madame Pomfrey was asking more specific questions. Lynn had heard enough. Strange blood droplet, hit, blood-sucking. Dumbledore arrived in time. It all pointed to the same thing. Lupin had been attacked at the Shrieking Shack, and the method matched the alchemical vampire vessel they'd encountered in the Forbidden Forest the night before. It wasn't a coincidence. Lynn turned and slipped out of the infirmary, closing the door softly behind him. He didn't go to History of Magic. He went straight back to the Hufflepuff dormitory, ducked into his room, lifted the lid of the conversion tank, and climbed in. Buzz, buzz, buzz! The moment the werewolf blood met the conversion system, the web of vessels inside came alive. The injected blood was hungrily drawn in, decomposed, and transformed. The fluid level dwindled, and a mist of blood began to churn. Lynn raised his wand, guiding the mist until it condensed into a single, dark droplet. He looked briefly at the goat used to feed Opal. "Sorry about this," he whispered. Without hesitation, he flicked his wand. The suspended droplet flew true and struck the goat in the cage. Sizzle! The animal went rigid, unable even to bleat. Seconds later, the same tragic scene from the Forbidden Forest played out. The goat collapsed into a dry, desiccated corpse. The blood droplet seemed drawn back into the thicker mist, which darkened a shade as it absorbed the blood. Lynn watched the mist settle, his face expressionless. The pieces were falling into place, and the coincidence he had feared was becoming a terrifying pattern. 178. They're coming for Hogwarts? Jingle bells, jingle all the way. Cheerful carols floated across the platform of the Hogwarts Express. With the formal start of the Christmas holidays, most students were hauling their trunks and crowding onto the train home. "Hey, Lynn, you're not coming back with us? My mom made an extra big turkey this year," Edgar called, enthusiastic. Lynn smiled and waved them off. "No thanks. You guys enjoy it. I wouldn't be able to handle that kind of feast." After seeing his roommates off and watching the train vanish into the distance, Lynn strolled back toward Hogwarts Castle. In the entrance hall, he nearly ran into Professor Lupin, who was heading out to the courtyard for some fresh air. Lupin looked thinner and more drawn than at the start of term. His once-fitting old robes hung a little baggy. His face was pale, and the shadows under his eyes heavy. "Good morning, Professor," Lynn said politely. Lupin saw him and nodded, a smile touching his lips. "Good morning, Lynn. You didn't go home?" "Oh, right, I remember you said." He trailed off. He seemed about to say something else, then shook his head as if embarrassed. "Never mind. It's nothing." Lynn blinked. "Never mind? Professor, that's a real cliffhanger." "Professor, is something the matter?" he asked, genuinely puzzled and just the right amount concerned. Lupin looked at Lynn's innocent expression and hesitated. Then, deciding it wasn't too awkward after all, he cleared his throat and spoke plainly. "Ahem. It's like this. The taste of the wolfsbane potion Professor Snape brewed this month is, well, very peculiar. More memorable than any I've had before." Lynn understood instantly. "Oh no, he thinks I've been experimenting with the potions again?" While there had been a past mishap or two, this definitely wasn't his doing this time. He shook his head emphatically. "Professor, you've got the wrong person. This month's wolfsbane potion was absolutely definitely 100% not brewed by me. I swear by the Hufflepuff kitchens." He looked entirely sincere. Lupin froze for a beat, then flushed slightly. Of course, he jumped to conclusions because Snape's potion tasted so strange it didn't seem human brewed, and his mind had gone to the one student with a reputation for tinkering. Stupid brain, think fast. Lupin suddenly brightened and tried to salvage the moment, doing his best to sound like a proper professor. "Ahem, how honorable. Brave enough to clear up a misunderstanding and stand by the facts. Very good. 5 points to Hufflepuff." He almost had to force the words out. Even he didn't fully believe the justification for awarding points. Lynn almost laughed at the improvised recovery. "Thank you, Professor. You're actually very nice." Lupin chuckled awkwardly and patted Lynn on the shoulder. "Yes. Good. Merry Christmas, Lynn. Enjoy the quiet holiday." Then he hurried off toward the courtyard, as if lingering would only make things more awkward. Time passed quietly. Halfway through the Christmas break, Lynn sat alone in his shared room and let out a long breath, stretching his aching back. On the lab bench he'd set up were the core components he had taken from the artificial vampire device, dismantled even more thoroughly. Scattered among them were parchments covered in calculations and runic analysis. In the middle of the bench sat his latest creation, a peculiar crystal globe and an ordinary-looking gemstone. This globe was no ordinary geographical model. The sphere was as clear as crystal, but there were no landmasses, only a slowly swirling nebula-like silver mist of magical energy. Within that mist, a tiny, striking dark red point of light flickered in a particular spot. "Finally, done," Lynn said, exhaustion in his voice. After several days of relentless tinkering, he had finally reverse-engineered the remote consciousness projection function from that alchemical core. The globe was the result. It could roughly locate a target's general region by detecting that unique form of energy. As long as that fellow hasn't left Earth's atmosphere and is still somewhere on this planet, he ran a finger along the globe's smooth surface to activate it. He won't escape this reverse tracker. The silver mist accelerated, as if scanning the whole world. Lynn followed the movement of the little red light. A second ago, it had clearly sat over Egypt, flickering along the Nile or near some desert ruins. Then, without warning, the light vanished. No, it didn't vanish. It reappeared almost instantly over the British Isles. Before Lynn could get a clear look, it flickered again, settling on a spot in the Scottish Highlands, and stopped. Lynn's breath hitched as he stared at the position. The Scottish Highlands, the region where Hogwarts stood. "Holy," he swore aloud. "They're coming for Hogwarts? I haven't even had a chance to settle things with you, and you've gone straight for my doorstep." Outside Hogsmeade, near the shrieking shack, the wind masked the slight crackling of space opening. In the dim light, several figures materialized. At the head of the group stood a tall, thin man wrapped in a dusty, dark yellow traveling cloak. His hood had been pushed back, revealing a face bleached by lack of sunlight, deep eye sockets, high cheekbones, thin, bloodless lips. Only his eyes shone with an eerie, unnatural light. In his hand, he gripped a strangely shaped staff. Its shaft looked carved from black bone, and an irregular polyhedral crystal was set at its tip. Behind him, three tall forms stood silently in heavy-hooded black robes, faces hidden. A faint dark red glow pulsed under the brims of their hoods, more of those artificial vampires. The man looked around the dilapidated shack and smiled. A low, chilling laugh escaped him. "Albus Dumbledore, wise for a lifetime, yet you would never imagine that I would play hide-and-seek with you, would you?" He glanced toward the direction of Egypt. Dumbledore had been doggedly tracking his trail there, forcing him to abandon several important alchemical sites and hide like a rat. "You've turned Egypt upside down looking for me," the man said, the smile in his voice growing cruel, "while I have come back to your home base right where you think you're safest." He looked toward Hogwarts. "It was here that I lost two precious blood puppets." His voice trembled with something like grief. "Each blood puppet cost me so much, materials I dug up painstakingly from the depths of pyramids and priests' tombs, risking curses and death. They were mine, my investments like children. And for one target, I lost two of them, gone." This was not just a loss of fighting power, but a blow to his knowledge and wealth. According to the last transmission from the final blood puppet before it went silent, its destroyer had been a student at Hogwarts, a young boy wizard who had the nerve to smash a blood puppet head-on. "Lupin," he hissed, teeth bared, "and that brat who thinks he's untouchable. It's time to settle this score." 179. Vulcan clears the way. "Expelliarmus!" A dazzling red beam of light, whistling sharply, shot through the broken window of the shrieking shack and struck toward the pale-faced wizard who was boasting with his back to the glass. He didn't even turn. Just as the disarming charm was about to hit his back, the three motionless blood puppets sprang into life. They moved with a single fluid motion, sliding to shield Lina's like a wall. From the two puppets in front burst a viscous, almost tangible blood-red light, weaving itself into an arched crimson shield that rippled like congealing blood. Bang! The disarming charm slammed into the crimson barrier with a dull thud. The shield rippled and then threw the spell off, the red beam veering upward and tearing through the shack's roof, sprinkling dust and splinters down into the room. Only then did the pale-faced wizard turn around, face composed but mocking. "Oh, look who it is," he drawled. "Isn't this our dear Professor Remus Lupin? Hogwarts medical care is impressive. Dragged you back from death's door so quickly, and you're already bouncing around looking for me. Did Dumbledore tell you I was here, or did your nose lead you?" The sarcasm was unmistakable. Lupin, who had only seen the figure from behind, now recognized the gaunt, pale face. "Linus," he said, voice rising in disbelief. "Aren't you supposed to be in Egypt?" "Yes, Remus," Linus said with a crooked smile. "According to your script, I should be dead, rotting in some ditch, right?" The smile twisted. "But look, I'm not only alive, I'm better than ever. And who do I owe all this to?" His tone sharpened, his eyes flamed with red light. "It's all thanks to you, Remus. Your justice forced me down a greater path. Now it's time to collect the interest." Before Lupin could reply, two blood puppets smashed through the ruined roof. Like meteors with dark red trails, they hurtled off toward the distant, illuminated spires of Hogwarts Castle. Fast, determined, unmistakably aimed. "No, stop them!" Lupin understood instantly. Terror flooded him. A handful of students were still at Hogwarts over the holidays, and staff remained on duty. If those alchemical monsters reached the castle, the consequences would be unthinkable. He fumbled to raise his broken wand and cast a desperate spell to intercept the flying puppets, anything to delay them long enough to warn those at Hogwarts. But the last puppet at Lina's side suddenly billowed its black robes. Two clawed hands, rimed in cold blood red light, slid from its sleeves. The air around it darkened. The ground beneath it seemed to sink as the puppet blurred and lunged at Lupin with breathtaking speed. The stench of blood and the reek of death hit Lupin before the claws did. The puppet's talons were already within 3 feet of his face, far faster than any ordinary wizard could track. "Protego!" Lupin cried, instinctively slamming up a shield charm. A translucent barrier sprang into being. Clang! 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 The puppet's claws attacked in a flurry, each strike bearing the force to shear through steel. They rained on the shield like hail on a tin roof. The charm trembled and flickered. Fine, spreading cracks spidered across it as if a hammer hammered tempered glass again and again. Lupin, still weak from recent wounds, could not sustain a flawless shield against such a relentless assault. With a clean, sickening crack, the charm shattered into a scatter of motes. The claws tore through. Rip, cloth shredded, flesh split open. A slash ripped from his left shoulder to his right ribs, deep enough to flash bone. Blood soaked his robes. The blow flung him backward into rotten furniture, splinters and dust flying. A muffled groan escaped him as his vision dimmed. His wand, caught in the impact and the sweep of the claws, was severed, leaving only a jagged stub of wood in his hand. Lena's triumphant laughter echoed through the shack. He sauntered over to the wounded professor, bending to grab Lupin by the hair, forcing him to look up. Up close, Lupin could see madness blazing in Linus's eyes and smell the strange tang on him. "Who would have thought, Remus," Linus hissed, voice low and venomous, "that the little wolf cub who once hid in the shadows and hated himself would become a respected professor at Hogwarts?" How poetic. If that old dog Dumbledore hadn't shown up so quickly that night at the Shrieking Shack, you ought to have been part of my collection long ago. A flicker of regret crossed his face at the memory of their prior failure, then hardened into something colder. Never mind, old debts and new grudges can be settled together today. He let go, letting Lupin slump back, then flicked his wand nonchalantly. Incarcerus! Chains shot from the wand's tip, snaking around the bleeding professor and binding him tightly. They dragged him roughly into a chair and lashed him into it until he could not move. The friction made his wound blaze. Blood flowed faster. "Stay here," Linus whispered into Lupin's ear, leaning close. "Watch and listen. Watch your Hogwarts, the one you and Dumbledore fought so hard for. Tremble in fear. Watch your students become fodder for my precious blood puppets. This is the payment you deserve for interfering with me back then." Straightening, he gestured toward Hogwarts. The last puppet transformed into a streak of black and red and shot off after the others. Inside the shack, only the bound, bleeding professor remained, and the smug, pale-faced wizard savoring the scene. Lupin managed to lift his head and look toward the castle. All he could do was pray. Pray someone would sense the danger. Pray that Dumbledore would arrive before everything became irreparable. Time stretched in the cold, still silence. Then, boom! An earth-shattering explosion rolled from the direction of Hogwarts. The ground trembled beneath their feet. A blazing, blood-red column of light leapt into the sky from near the castle, bathing half the heavens in a relentless red glow that shone even through the holes in the shack's roof. Shapes moved within the flames. A lone figure could be made out, standing and waving a wand. "Partis temporis," the figure shouted, the cry of a terrible blazing spell. "Fiendfire path. 180. I'm on guard against you. Inside Hogwarts Castle, the Great Hall." It was dinner time. Steaming platters lined the long tables, and although only a handful of students and staff were staying for Christmas, the hall still hummed with life. Then, boom! An earth-shaking explosion from outside the castle ripped through the evening calm. The Great Hall fell utterly silent. Forks paused midair, conversations died, everyone stared toward the high windows in shock. Professor McGonagall slammed down her cutlery and rose as one. Her gaze snapped to the floor-to-ceiling panes. Outside, the distant sky was lit by a furious, churning red blaze. Thick smoke rolled up. Even through the glass, the force of the blast could be felt. "Good heavens!" Professor Flitwick squeaked, jumping up beside her. McGonagall's heart dropped. Hogwarts was under attack. There was no hesitation. She moved with the decisive authority that marked a deputy headmistress. "Phileas, hold the hall. Do not let anyone leave without my order or Professor Dumbledore's signal. I'm going to see what happened." "Leave it to me, Minerva." Flitwick scrambled onto a chair and began shepherding the startled students. McGonagall hurried through the Great Hall and ran toward the main entrance at a pace that belied her years. She reached the courtyard just as the glow from the blast painted the sky. The explosion seemed to have occurred some distance from the castle, nearer the ground's borders, but its threat felt immediate. She raised her wand and pointed it at the knight. "Per totem locomotor." At her command, the ancient stone guardians scattered. Knights, gargoyles, and beastly sculptures that had stood silent for centuries flared to life. Their carved eyes flashed, joints cracked, and they leapt down from pedestals, niches, and rooftops. Arms that had not moved in generations hefted weapons. Stone feet began marching. They spread to every entrance, along the walls, to the courtyard, forming ranks of living stone. As the guardians activated, the castle's old defenses stirred in response. A shimmering ward, like a great inverted bowl, rose up from the grounds and closed over Hogwarts, sealing a dome of protection above the castle. Only when the ward was secure did McGonagall allow herself a small, tense breath, but she did not relax. She needed to contact Dumbledore. She carefully drew a feather from her robe pocket, one of the emergency contact items Dumbledore had entrusted to her, and prepared to use it. Meanwhile, in the shrieking shack, Linus stared at the roaring flames with a sneer frozen to astonishment. The scale of that explosion far exceeded his expectations. Alarm crawled up his spine. He forced himself to check the status and positions of his 3 blood puppets, and what he saw made his face change. All 3 were concentrated deep within the heart of the blast, almost overlapping. "What's this?" Linus hissed, furious and unnerved. He sank his consciousness into one of the blood puppets. Vision shifted, senses melded, and he felt as though he had fallen into an ice cellar. There were no castle corridors, no panicked students, only endless, surging crimson flames. The heat warped the air. Flame pressed in on them from every side, sapping the shields that cloaked the puppets. Each wave of fire shook the wards, their glow dimming a little with every surge. Where is this? A fire trap? Linus tried to force the puppets to break free, but the flames formed a perfect cage. Any attempt to charge met with more violent walls of fire that thrust them back. A jaunty voice drifted down from above the blaze. "Yo, so you're here. Quick to possess." Linus looked up. Above the inferno, a figure hovered in midair. "It's you," Linus snarled. "You little brat, you ruined my plans." "Of course it's me," the figure said, looking down at the 3 puppets trapped in the sea of flame. Lynn's tone was mockingly bright. "Surprised? Upset? Happy with this welcome party?" He flicked the magic in his hand and sent flames to lick at the other 2 puppets. Linus felt their energies drain, their shields faded. At this rate, it wouldn't be long. "Kid, I advise you to stop. Release my puppets," Linus barked, "or you'll pay a price you can't imagine. Your friends, your families, the whole of Hogwarts." "Wow," Lynn cut him off with exaggerated admiration. "So threatening. You'll make me pay an unimaginable price and drag all of Hogwarts into it. How impressive. I'm trembling." His smile grew cold. But first, say goodbye to your precious toys. He waved his wand. Thunder cracked in the fiery sky. Bolts of lightning, thick and violent, tore through the blaze and struck the puppet whose shield was the weakest. Thunder and fire met. Earth and sky converged. The puppet's blood-red shield shattered like a soap bubble the instant the lightning hit. The blast that followed blew the puppet and the ground beneath it into fragments and charred remains. One blood puppet gone. Linus watched, helpless. Years of his work, destroyed in an instant. "How dare you?" he roared, fury seething. But Lynn struck again without a break. Another bolt fused thunder with flame. The second puppet disintegrated in the same merciless instant. Two down. Only the puppet Linus occupied remained. Seething, Linus tried to sever his link and yank his consciousness back to his body in the shrieking shack. He wanted to get back and kill Lupin, vent his rage, before planning anything else. But his will met a wall. His consciousness felt glued in place, trapped to the puppet. He pushed and pulled and could not wrench himself free. Panic edged in. "Trying to run?" Lynn's voice drifted down again, amused. "Can you escape?" Linus looked up in terror and saw Lynn holding a small, run-of-the-mill looking gem between finger and thumb, pointed straight at him. "Recognize this?" Lynn grinned, a smile Linus found almost demonic. "A fresh experimental toy. I call it the soul-fixing orb. As for the effect, quite good. Specially made for those who like to let their minds wander all over the place. Surprised?" Linus's face drained of color. He had been guarding against many things, but this move, this binding gem, was exactly what he feared.